All right, so we are excited. Appreciate everybody taking out of their busy Saturday. I know it's been a busy day around the town. Some of us have good early morning work. So my job is really kind of get us started. We want to be as efficient as possible, but also make sure the board is comfortable, right? Because this is going to be, I think it's going to be very interesting information. And I think you're going to be impressed, Becky, with the input from the department. It's really put together a spreadsheet that I think is fascinating, and it's a great way to think about the town today and going into this fiscal year, but also 5 years in advance, 3 years down the road, whatever. And I can see us doing this every year so that you guys have an opportunity to think about the future. I would, and I think you and I talked about it, but I'm very comfortable with board members asking questions like, okay, like if Becky talks about something like, I'm having trouble absorbing that, feel free to ask, because it is going to be, I think, new information that is just going to take a little time, and that's okay. And I think what's happened here, and just to kind of give a little recap, is we're a little bit, I would say we're behind the 8 ball. That's kind of strong language, but we're a little bit behind. And just as a brief history lesson, we went through the recession. Everybody does remember that. I certainly remember that. And coming out of the recession, we had a rebound. And we actually lowered the tax rate 10% to be revenue neutral, worked very hard. And then the counter rebound got challenged. So we spent the next 3 years or so, 3 or 4 years, rebating people money, but we never compensated because we devalued too much. But, and then, it seemed like over time we did start to rebuild the fund balance, and then COVID hit, so, and I think throughout this budget process, the town has budgeted very conservatively based on the board's direction. Of course, he is the manager. But I do think we hit a tipping point. I think we've hit a point that it's time for kind of a reality check. Okay, let's look at what's going on in the community, in our finances, where we headed as an organization. Does anybody have any thoughts or questions? Yes, sir.
Just for clarification, because that's a big timeline, are you speaking when you say the recession, is that 2008, 2009? The reval was 2011, and 12, 13, 14 was making it back, et cetera?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and of course we hit recessions, the COVID. So, all right, if there's no questions on Becky, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So just want to give a brief overview of the topics that we plan to cover today. So we have a lot to get through in really just a couple of hours. So the timeline on the agenda is really just a guide. But if we move more quickly through things, that's perfectly great. But at the same time, we want to create space for discussion and questions and understanding. So we'll just try to be flexible with our day as much as possible. But we are going to start off today just doing a high-level overview of the departments. We thought it was important for board members to hear directly from our department heads who are doing the work day in, day out at the operational level to better understand kind of where they see themselves today and some of the things that they think are going to be important to focus on over the next couple of years to make sure that we are where we need to be and being able to provide services to the community at the level that they expect. We will then move into a budget forecasting model that has been built to help start to put this to paper and start to be able to understand how we can add some of the things that we think we're going to need in a way that we think is, I would call it assertive in getting us to where we need to be, not aggressive, still incremental, that does start moving us in the direction that we think we're going to need to go. We then have an interesting what-if scenario from the perspective of we are going to be receiving a significant amount of federal funding through the ARP federal stimulus, and we have identified potentially some opportunities to offset the needed tax rate and still be able to move forward with some of these operational increases, depending on the guidance that we ultimately get regarding our ability to use those funds. We want to review our capital improvements program. There are a number of things in there that are not currently funded, and that will be over and above some of the funding needs that we see for operations. And we'd like to finish up today with a conversation, sort of a continuation, if you will, of what we started with this group right before the pandemic hit, related to the potential of the bond referendum and reviewing the projects that might be a good fit for that revenue, and see how the board may want to continue that conversation and focus on some of the timing, some of the pros and cons of when to move forward with asking the voters for their input on whether or not on some of those programs. So with that, we'll go ahead and dive right in, and we want to again start with that high-level overview from our departments. So we have been working with our department heads to understand their current needs, as well as anticipate what they expect they're going to need for operations over the next few years. In some cases, they feel like there is a need or a justification to catch up, where there are some things that we may not be adequately funding today. And in other cases, it's making sure that we're keeping pace with the growth that the community continues to see. If population continues to increase, it takes more people and more, higher levels of operations in order to provide the same level of service. In the end, though, we definitely feel that keeping the status quo for some of our staffing and operations levels is not going to be sufficient as we move forward with the population growth within the community. And we want to make sure that we are meeting those service levels. So with that, I want to turn it over to the departments again. You're just going to hear from each employee, and we will start with Clark.
Good morning. Can you guys hear me? Is that too loud? Good. All right. So in the packet you received is kind of the overview of some of the stuff I wanted to talk about. Since I was hired here in 2018, a lot of the information I was receiving from the officers and from the staff there at the police department was about staffing, was about adequate staffing in patrol and other areas of the police department. Were we falling behind in what we were looking like with the population growth? So we looked at that, and we looked at it in several different ways, and you've heard me talk about this when we did our staffing study in 2018. There's many different ways, right? There is a system of looking at officer per 1,000, looking at patrol officer per 1,000, and then there's another way of looking at it, which we did in 2018 called a workload analysis study. So in that workload analysis study, what we were able to identify as our 30,000 foot view, which is what we're talking about here today, is that staffing has not kept up with population growth. 2008, 2009, prior to me coming, was the last time we added police officers to our police department. That was 10 years of no additional staff growth, if you will, in patrol or sworn areas because I don't know the reason why, but there was no population or no staffing growth in our police department for 10 years. So in 2018, we did add one police officer, but that was funded through a private-public partnership with Carmel Christian, and then the staffing study occurred in 2018. During that staffing study, there were many different requests or suggestions for the police department and its growth. We have satisfied some of those, including detectives, including some administrative staff, and those type of things. But one area that we tend to be lacking is in our patrol officer growth. So we did add 2 lieutenants, which was a huge improvement and recommended under the 2018. So with that, I just want to kind of talk about the staffing model that we're using in the police department. Includes that model of workload analysis, looking at obligated versus unobligated time, but also looking at patrol officer per 1,000. And we can get into this later on if you guys want to. We do have additional graphs and information for you to take a look at. But in 2011, our patrol staffing model was at 1.41 per 1,000. Well, the recommended staffing model for this region of the country is a 1.38. So when the 2018 study was done, the study came in, looked at our workload, looked at the amount of obligated and unobligated time, and said our recommended staffing for patrol should be 1.369, which is below the national average, but because of our workload and our crime rate, that's where they believe we should be. That was 2018. We did not make those necessary immediate changes due to incremental implementation, but the populations continue to grow. We have dropped from where we were to currently we're at 1.11 per 1,000 patrol, well below the 2011 average, well below the national average, and well below the recommended average from our workload analysis study. The 4 officers that I have requested in this year's budget, which I know we're going to talk about later on, will get us up to a 1.26, but still below the recommendation from the 2018 study. The reason that is we're now 4 years behind the study. So population has continued to grow, but the Department of Patrol has not. So with what you'll see later on in these presentations is there's a request for 2 additional officers every 2 years.
Chief, can I interrupt?
Sure.
What are you using as a basis for our population right
Well, with the sliding scale, and it's all in these graphs if we want to go into. I can tell you right now. So we're looking at 34,140 for 2020.
Thank you.
And then based on growth, and we do have a trend line to try to show an estimated growth each year based on the past year's growth of what we would be in the near future to try to keep up with that. But even adding 2 officers every 2 years, you're still only keeping up. We haven't quite caught up to the 4 years that are behind. So the point of all of this is we're not looking to expand operations. We are just trying to catch up in the area that we have not adequately staffed based on patrol or population growth. And to me, that's really my 30,000-foot view, really where I want to see the department go, so that those of you that have seen the amount of proactive work our police officers are doing, we've studied the workload analysis, we've studied how many calls for service per 1,000 will increase to our officers per year, done that calculation to try to figure out what we do to keep it at 1.369, or get to it, I should say, and ultimately maintain it. So we can talk more about that. I don't want to go into the numbers too heavily. But I do want to stress that we are well below the recommended staffing model of 2018, which is 1.369, or at 1.11 per 1,000 patrol. There's going to be other needs that we're going to see in the near future. We'll talk about them, I guess, as this thing progresses, but a training center that the fire department and the police department are so desperately in need of to continue. And I'll stop there.
Rob? Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
At present, okay, that's good. How many officers do you have present now, total? And in the whole department, then sworn officers?
The whole department, including myself, is 65, which includes 2 grant positions.
Okay. Sworn officers?
Yeah. And when I talk, that is sworn.
That's still sworn,
Yep.
total department?
65, including me.
Non-sworn too.
Non-sworn, 85, 87, something to that effect. I'm sorry, I don't have the total number. What's the
Okay, so what I'm hearing from you is that right now, from where the numbers are, you're 6 officers from just catching up. Is that correct? 4 plus 2.
Plus the 4-year gap from 2018, yes.
Right. But that would just bring us up to average, right?
That would bring us up to the 1.36-ish.
Out of those 65 officers, how many officers of color do you have?
I can get back to you on that answer. I have it. I just got to pull it up out of my computer. I have the total number.
How many female officers?
I can pull that up. I don't have that off the top of my head.
If you would, I'll probably think about it. If you would let me know, what's the highest rank of any female and person of color in your department as well, too. Now, I see you say you added on 2 new lieutenants, right?
Correct. That was through a budget process, yes.
I got you, but it's still officers, right?
Yes.
Now, is the department planning on expanding? I know you got a lieutenant, I think your rank is corporal, sergeant, lieutenant, captain. And you,
Correct.
is this looking at expanding to like have a deputy chief or something like?
The board did approve an assistant chief for the police department. We have not filled it. That would come from one of our, the way that it was approved is it's a reclassification of one of the captain positions to a major position.
Okay.
That has not been filled yet.
Okay. So you are saying you are gonna have a major position at some point?
Correct.
And would that be a major and assistant chief?
Same position.
So the major will be like the assistant?
The major is the rank title of the position.
I want to commend you on your recruitment. I've seen a lot of new officers that you hired since 2018, and I commend you. And how are you doing on the accreditation? How are we coming on that?
We're good. We're moving that thing forward. We do have most of our policies caught up, or at least to the point where we're getting ready to submit. I'm hoping within the next 6 to 12 months we can submit for a review by CALEA to get us certified.
Well, I appreciate Chief. You're doing a wonderful job. I appreciate all the work that you and your staff and team does.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. Rob?
Good morning. So the Matthews Fire and EMS Department is a department in the midst of transition. The real bulk of that transition began in 2005 when the town hired the first career firefighters to supplement the volunteers when they were not available. 2018, we didn't realize, but we documented that program was broken. In 2018, a large percentage of the volunteer shifts were short to the point where we closed Station 2 almost 100 times in 2018. In 2019 budget, council gave us the 10 additional career positions, which allowed us to go 24 hours with the absolute minimum career staff to staff 2 engines on a regular basis. That transition, that blended staffing with career and volunteer working together works well. But again, volunteer staffing or reliance on volunteer staffing is inconsistent at best. We have been blessed through COVID because of a lot of our college age volunteers are at home. So they're working for us, they're studying at the fire station, but we have access to that capability. Our volunteer program is strong. It is strong in terms of it is our best career recruiting initiative. 11 of our current career staff came up through our volunteer ranks. Many of those had no certifications when they joined the department. And we continue to send our volunteers off to other departments for full-time careers in fire and EMS, or go on to college programs to be PAs and doctors, and things of that nature. Yes, we did achieve a Class 2 rating in 2020, which is quite an accomplishment, but there are varying standards for staffing. ISO looks at warm bodies. We need to focus on meeting OSHA requirements, and OSHA requirements require a certain number of certified firefighters. The reality with our volunteer program is about 30% of the time we have a certified firefighter filling one of the 4 volunteer slots. EMS is very heavily what we do, and we take those volunteer EMTs and staff the squads so we can staff the fire apparatus as efficiently as possible. We have talked about Station 3 and the need to provide a consistent level of coverage across the town. the additional staffing that will be required for Station 3 is forefront in our mind. As Mr. Whitley pointed out, we are seeking to be a diverse department, but unfortunately, our current hiring one or two at a time does not provide us the opportunity to get a diverse pool. And if we set out on a course, we can identify people and we could do a train to hire or hire then train or a recruit programs like the police department's doing. We've talked about fleet issues in the past. Fleet continues to be a big consumer of capital dollars. Just yesterday, I drove one of our 4-year-old engines back from the shop, and that truck already has 42,000 miles on it in 4 years. So we're hoping to get the expected life out of it. As I mentioned earlier, our emphasis needs to turn to being certain that we're complying with OSHA and NFPA mandates. The deputy chief, that is our number one priority this year, is absolutely necessary for us to move the department forward. When we took all the officers off a daylight rotation and put them on shifts, that just means everything has to take a backseat to running calls. So we definitely need the administrative support to move the department forward as well.
Thank you. Chief, you said you're in class 2. Tell me a little bit about class 2. What does that mean?
Insurance rates across the country are based on insurance service offices classification. So ISO looks at 3 basic components. It looks at the water system of the municipality. It looks at the communication system, 911 system, and it looks at the fire department. The fire department is 50% of that rating.
So what's the number that we want to be at?
Well, we're class 5. Best way I can describe this, there are 3 bands to ISO. So 10 means you have no fire protection. 1 means you have superior fire protection. So 9, 8, and 7 is a band. 6, 5, and 4 is a band. 3, 2, and 1 is a band. For a residential homeowner, our lowering the ISO rating from a 5 to a 2 essentially allowed the homeowner to lower their insurance rate. Commercial property, most of it is individually rated by their insurance company. But like I mentioned, ISO looks at warm bodies. So for the last 2 years, we've had a large enough number of warm bodies at work to score highly on our ISO rating. But NFPA and OSHA looks at certified bodies, and that's where we're coming up deficient in the EMT ranks. The biggest problem there is ISO, OSHA's 2 in, 2 out hazardous environment standard. For every 2 people you put in a hazardous environment, you have to have 2 on the outside ready to make entry. If we're only riding 3 on a truck, we can't meet 2 in, 2 out. So we are holding our breath, hoping that nothing happens that drive us over into a problem.
So 2 is a pretty good place for us to be.
2 is a very good rating for the department, yes.
One other question, how many total you have in the fire department and how many is actually full-time staff?
24 full-time firefighters. We have 3 administrative staff, including me. We have 42 certified members who are either firefighters or EMTs. We have 16 fire corps members, and we have about 7 probationary or recruit members.
The volunteers.
Yes, they would be volunteers.
All right, so how many black officers do you have, or officer of color, Hispanics in it.
I can't give you that number. I can give you a round number that about 18% of the department is not white male.
All right. Now, I was over at your department when you did the story. I saw a Hispanic young lady there. You don't know how many black officers?
We have one black career firefighter. I can't give you the number of volunteers right now.
What kind of recruitment? You know, a year ago, we talked about recruiting and trying to make sure that we can get people diverse for back out the town and the county. What kind of recruitment program are you doing? I know the chief, I saw his program and goals for recruiting. What are you doing to recruit minorities? And I know fire department is pretty hard to come because a lot of minorities are not in the fire department. But what are we doing to make sure that we come up to the number? And you're going to be asking for more officers with Fire Station 3. I'm all for that because that's on our side. And we don't have that protection up there on either one. But what are you and your department doing to recruit minorities, females and people of color?
Well, prior to COVID, our training and recruitment officer was partnering with Officer A, police department, and going out to the community colleges, job fairs, and things of that nature. We've pretty much been curtailed since March of last year. But as I said, you know, under our current hiring process, we're forced to hire people who are already certified firefighters and EMTs. And you're absolutely correct. That tends to be a white male population. So, you know, if we could hire in larger groups, or we could change our thinking, we could do an academy style program where we hire character and then train. Charlotte Fire Department-ish. We can do the training in-house through Central Piedmont, but, you know, with our current hiring, we're hiring people that we know are certified and can get through EMT. All they have to do is get through 6 months of probation. If we flip that model around and we hire a character, it's going to take them about a year to get through firefighter and EMT, and about 25% of the people who take EMT don't pass. So we're holding our breath for about a year before they're fully certified, and then a 6-month probation period to see if they can actually do the job. But we're willing to try that. But, you know, council would have to give us the money to hire, then train, then put to work, which, you know, right now it takes us about 3 months to hire somebody. So now we're taking that vacancy and we're spreading it out to almost a year before they're fully functional as firefighters.
Thanks. CJ?
All right, thank you. Can you hear me okay? I'm sorry, I'm having internet issues, so I keep walking along, but you can hear me, so that's good. So the Public Works is kind of in a similar situation as the police and the fire. I'm going to take you back to 2001. I really started doing a history lesson on the town and where we were and where we come. I've got numbers since then. So in 2001, we had roughly 22,000 people working at 22,613. At that time, we had 36 people in the Public Works Department. Since that time, we've now grown to over 34,000 people. We started matching that growth for the first few years. We went up to a high of 39 people in our department in 2004. We're now down to 35 people. So that's one less than we had in 2001. So we're serving roughly 50% larger population, 50% larger building capacity, over 100% larger parks capacity, and fleet capacity that's roughly 60 or 70% larger than it was. So we've done a lot. We use the county to help us with certain things. New developments come on board. They're doing inspections. They help us with plan reviews, things like that. Part of the leasing program has really helped us on the fleet side. It's really gotten to the point where we can only do so much with what we've got. Yeah, we're continually just running from one thing to the next and getting behind in almost everything. So what you have before you is a plan on how to not even get us back to where we were in 2001, but at least to start to catch up to where we need to be. There are additional people that we're asking for, specifically in landscape. We've added so much landscape in the last 10 years that we've had to cut back on what we do. We are not mowing a lot of the rights of way that we used to. We have contracted out some of it. A lot of it, we've told people we can't do it anymore. It's up to you to do it in front of your house. Personally, I think that's a good thing to do. Have people responsible for the property. But there's other places that are along that. When we're in mowing season, we are going all day, every day. And if anything comes up, we don't have spare manpower or manpower to go out and address a lot of those things. Just like the other day, we had a fire sprinkler system here. That happened. Albert was at the police station helping them put in their new gate system. He had to stop what they're doing over there, come here to try to fix that. And he still hasn't even gotten to the LED system for light cupola that we have sitting here waiting for him to look into. That's how we're running in pretty much every division all the time. So anyway, what questions do you have?
Thank you, CJ. The cupola system lighting, didn't we pay to have it installed?
No, we paid just for the equipment. We're installing it ourselves.
So it was also in need of other repairs besides lighting. The repairs were done, correct?
Correct.
And we bought the lighting package, but we have to install it.
Correct.
But there's already electric up there. Is it just a matter of mounting the fixtures or?
No, the electric that's up there is not functional, so we don't have to run the electric. When we pull the permits, we just have to have the time to actually do it.
Wouldn't that be easily contracted out?
It would be.
Okay.
So I guess my big question to you, CJ, would be, there's always seasonal things. So just to put that down here, is a hybridization, you probably need more staff on a 7-day, 24-hour basis, something to that effect. But the seasonal things could be done more on a contract basis. Can we begin looking at what those deltas are? I mean, does it make more sense to put $100,000 into the budget, just hypothetically, for contract work? Because you're not going to find another Albert, so to speak. But there are Alberts out there that are in a contract situation. So I guess what I'm asking is there a way to look at this as a hybrid? Like, what are the definite needs of having feet on ground versus someone who can pick up a phone and within 24 hours they're action plans?
Thank you. And yeah, that's a good point. Seasonal, a lot of things used to be seasonal. Paving used to be seasonal. Concrete used to be seasonal. Now we're pretty much able to do all of it almost all the time. There are weather limitations to some of those, but typically we are busy all the time. The only one that gets buried in the winter is the landscape. That's where we need additional manpower during summer, and that's why we have seasonal worker in the summer. And the budget, there's an ask for another seasonal worker later on. We have looked at contracting. We tried contracting for stormwater last year. The prices we were hoping to get, we did not get. They came about twice as expensive as what we hoped. It basically cost us 3 times as much as what we could have done. So we are looking into that, and I'd be happy to look into that for different areas. One of the hard things, though, is a lot of what we do. It's not just street work, just sidewalk work. We do things all the time. We come in here and move furniture. When an office gets a person moves in, we added a wall, moved the AC system, painted it, added furniture. We do stuff like that all around town all the time. Like banners, signs, those sorts of things. So it's very hard to contract and hard to find a big rig.
So much have a question, one compliment CJ department. in the Crestdale Heritage Trail. I said this other night at the meeting, I don't think you were there. We have gained so much popularity and, what's the word I'm looking for? People, connectivity, that's the word. Or they are walking, riding bikes, children and families. That really turned out really well. And I want to commend you for behind Eric. Eric, if you don't know that Eric is Hispanic. Nicaragua, is that where he's from? Well, that's right. But he did a wonderful job of staying on, making sure that the team there, make sure everything, but it looked really good. I want to commend you and the staff on that, especially Susan too. I know saw her more than anybody else, but that really well. And thank you, and I appreciate it.
You're quite welcome. Actually, he was actually born in Boston, believe it or not, but then he moved to Guatemala and grew up there.
I'd like to say a comment as well. CJ, I'd like to thank you for continuing to get the job done with limited staff. I mean, these numbers are really telling. We have one less person than you did in 2001. And you haven't been screaming that the house is on fire, which we appreciate. But I think this is an area where we need to give you some really sure. Appreciate the job that you have done over the years with probably less employees than
With that being said, how many more people do you need, CJ, in public works to get you to where we are now? Because I heard the numbers too, is nearly one less than what we had. I know this is, we're asking for money, all of you want more employees, that's a good thing. But how many more do you need to bring us up to where town of Matthews can be competitive?
So that's an interesting question. Just based on population, it would be a 50% increase. That's not good. We can't do that. I've gone through each of the divisions and looked at them individually on what they need over the next several years. I don't have it right now that I can bring up back in those numbers.
And we'll get into a little bit more detail of what we would kind of describe as what we think is going to be sort of the bare minimum. In fairness to CJ, not everything that he submitted made that list. He has not had the benefit of the full level of vetting that some of the other departments have. And so we plugged in quite a few people into the model that you'll see in a little bit. But that is something that we plan to continue to refine with CJ as we move forward year over year to take a deeper look at engineering as an example. Fleet is another example of, he had some requests in there that we said, we don't know enough today, but let's keep talking about it. So it may be something that continues to fill out over the next few years.
And I will say also, there are additional stormwater personnel that we are looking to get. It is not in here because it's not being funded through the general fund, the stormwater fund. And I didn't say the house was on fire because Rob has no.
Thanks, CJ. Corey?
All right, so in Parks and Recreation, we are a little bit unique in that our funding really comes from two pots, so to speak. So we have tourism fund, where that's the cultural arts and special events. Looking at those two divisions, where we are right now is, say, operational wise, we are in a good position. There will be an ask for another staff person in special events, but that is, I said, tied to tourism dollars and doesn't really affect the general fund. Needs in those two divisions are just say public domain for new events, different types of events, and that's where we're sort of headed in those two divisions. Looking at athletics, which in this case is Cruise Rec Center, and Parks and Greenways, those are the two divisions that are really tied to the general fund. Operational wise, I'll say we're also in a good position with those. Our operational needs are really tied to public works. It is the maintenance staff, I'll say I've shared it with everybody, but if you don't know, the dog park that's happening at First Halsey, that is 95% public works. So we're handling that in-house, along with some help from the county. The needs in parks and athletics really are capital needs. It's just the projects. Additional greenways and trails and park development, some of the spaces we have, and really want to move forward with developing those parcels. Again, the needs operational-wise really are, so I'm a big cheerleader for CJ to get some more, maintenance staff to help with our parks. But again, our needs really are capital needs and say not a big part of the operational discussion today.
CJ, if you would bring us up to where we are with the Crestdale Heritage signage that's going to come together. I don't know if I know I am, but so the staff and all commission know what it is.
We are very close. You should see signs being installed within the next 2 weeks. We work with Kalwa, I'll just call him Kurt, our sign guy. Great job. Everything has been finalized as far as what they're going to look like. Now it is vendors just installing the signs. Last timeline we got last week was within the next 2 weeks, you'll see them in the ground.
Thanks, Corey. Jay?
It's hot. Good morning, everyone. All right, so a brief overview of the planning department. We're a department of 6. We have 4 professional planners on staff, code enforcement, and a administrative assistant, deputy town clerk. That's Shana. Our department staffing has been static since 2006 when I came to work for the town. I would describe our staffing levels as adequate today. As you look at the town's growth trajectory and I think inevitability of us building out, you'll see a transition in our staff where we function a little less as plan reviewers, which is the public side you see us often as, and more as planners, where we're doing more work in the community. The 2 primary items you'll see in the summary in front of you today are, of course, the comp plan and a GIS coordinator or analyst, whichever way you want to describe it. I think we've got that in maybe 23, 24, 24, 25. You've heard me talk at length about the comp plan, spent some time in Blowing Rock last year talking about it. It is an aspirational document. This is what we want to be in the future. If you look at our vision statements, this is creating a plan of action for implementing those vision statements. The work that we do as a town from a planning perspective, again, as growth levels off and we build out, is becoming increasingly more complex. It's not 30 acres of single-family housing, which is relatively easy to deal with. But the types of projects, the mixed-use, redevelopment, these are extremely complex subject matter that are going to take a high level of thought and planning. Of course, the comp plan is at the core of what we do as a department, but it also serves the entire town and the community. Best practices are updating about every decade. Our plan was primarily drafted in 2011 and 12, so it is at that 10-year mark. The new Chapter 160D requirements, they're official as of July 1st, I believe, this year. The school of government recommends 10 years as sort of a max. We're required to keep an updated comprehensive plan. So we're kind of butting up against that time frame. And one last item I would add is in talking about growth and the changes the town is seeing and will continue to see is that we can't rest on our laurels. The town is very successful, make no doubt about that. But we also need to drive around and take a look at the community. Our housing stock is aging. Our shopping areas on US 74, some of which are 30 to 40 years old now. So you have to keep working on the level of success that we've achieved so far. So yeah, the comp plan is a huge part of how we can achieve that. Happy to answer any questions for you this morning.
All right, thanks, Jay.
Thank you.
Anya.
Hey, good morning. So as you're aware, HR is responsible for the entire life cycle of all of our employees. This includes recruiting, onboarding, benefit management, compensation, training, performance management, safety, risk management, employee relations, employee engagement, retention, and onboarding. We are a staff of 2.5. We have a risk manager, 3.5. And currently, most of our time is spent on compliance and things that are required just to keep the business running for our employees. However, we want to spend more time improving the employee experience. With the implementation of the HRMS system, we will have a lot more data easily accessible that will help us identify opportunities to do that. But in order to be able to use that data, we need time and staff to do it. So HR for the next 5 years is asking for one additional staff person. The other thing we have to continue to do, as you've heard me speak about several times, is we have to remain competitive with the towns and cities around us so that we can continue to attract and retain top talent. So I'm also asking for another compensation study not this coming fiscal year, but the following, so that we can analyze where we are and determine what we need to do to continue to remain competitive. Happy to answer any questions.
Hi. A year ago, we talked about recruiting. What had the HR department done towards recruitment?
So obviously the department that hires most employees is police. And they have a full-time recruiter, and Dustin spends a lot of time with the VLT classes and that job fairs prior to COVID to try to attract the talent to come to Matthews. But in addition, we advertise all of our positions in the Q City Metro, which is their predominant leadership is African Americans, the Hispanic League, obviously the Hispanic population, and we also advertise all of our jobs with the Asian American Chamber of Commerce, which is the Asian American community. So we're doing the best we can with the resources we have.
All right. We talked about this a little bit about going out, recruiting, letting people of color know that we are hiring people of color. How are we doing anything in going to like Johnson C. Smith or to these other schools like Korea Dale as a subject to recruit from that?
I know that the Officer A has done some work here, and Captain Rayner has gone with him a few times again prior to COVID. As far as actual HR staff going out and doing it, we don't have the staff in power.
One of the things in America, and I say this, America now is at a boiling point, and I know Chief police department seen this last week, and we talked, me and Hazen talked about this a little bit this morning while we was out at the Rosen Cemetery. The police are under full attack, and America is still divisive and hurt. And I'm gonna just be honest with you, as Black America, we're mad. We're mad and we're hurt. And so I'm tasked as your commissioner, and not only for this town, but part of this team, is to make sure that we be fair and equitable. And I know it's hard to recruit, but you've got to make an effort to make sure. Now, I know in the 3 incident with the police department, the one that I know if you hadn't seen it, you need to watch the one that's in Virginia where a lieutenant in the Army was stopped by a police officer. I know some of you might have, if not, you need to check that. Then the young man in Chicago, 13, we talked about that a little bit too, had a gun, tossed the gun behind the fence and was shot. That officer had 0.08 seconds to shoot or not shoot. And so we understand that. And then the other young man that was in Missouri, 20 years old, that the officer was supposed to have been tasering, she actually shot and killed him. So America is hot right now. Black America is hot. And I'm going to just be honest with you. And it disturbs me as as a person of color, but I have a grandson. I'm saying this because this Black Lives Matter not just for me. It should affect all of us. We should have concern for that. You're as department heads, we're on a different day now. And I'm for all to making sure you get what you need, but at the same time, old Sam said, if you always do what you always done, you always get what you always done. So you got to think out of the box. And I commend some of your department heads for thinking out of the box and being progressive and making sure that as you recruit, but it cannot, and I say this to you, Tanya, because in HR, I really pushed in 2016, Becky and I came on together. I always remember that because when I came to Commission, they hired Becky. But it's got to be on the mind of all departments here. You cannot just say, I can't find qualified blacks. You're going to have to actually get out and make sure, and then the employees that you have in your department, to make sure that you bring them along as well as you do with these other departments. Now, I'm a love for police officers. That's good. I was back to civil, but the blue is running through my vein as well too. And I'll do everything I can for the police department and the fire department because I know that's public service. But I pushed when I came. We did not have an HR. That bothered me. The department this big back and then. How many employees do we have in the town now? So,
165 full-time positions.
165. But back then, I think it was like 138 back then. But then it was. I really pushed, to make sure we had an HR. We need to. You cannot have a city and the operation this being not have an HR. I commend you for your department, but I'm asking you to actually recruit and make an effort to make sure that as you're hiring them to make sure to bring so it's a diverse team as we go on. But thank you for what you do and you do. Wonderful job. And congratulations on being the employee of the year.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tom.
All right. I get to pull double duty as finance director for 2 more weeks. As we look at the finance department, we do feel like we are in good shape staffing-wise as the MS system comes online. We do expect that there will be some increased capacity in current staff that will allow the department to absorb any operational expansions with the current levels that we have. So we think that we're in good shape. We don't anticipate any major needs in the next few years that would have a budgetary impact within that department. Obviously, the new finance director will come in and may tell us differently, and we'll deal with that when they do. But overall, we think we're in good shape there. The IT department, they do continue to keep up. I would describe our IT operations as functional. They are not necessarily optimal, but I do think that we keep up with the absolute minimum of what we need to do. There are some small requests that you'll see coming over the next few years to improve some of our computer replacement cycles and some small things like that to keep us more efficient and more operational, but no major infrastructure needs today that we can see coming in the next few years. So with that, we will wrap up with Maureen.
Hi, thanks. There are some needs in my communications division. The idea is to kind of bring on another person to help assist me, free up some of my time to be able to do more proactive things, more media relations, more videos, and free up time from staff from other departments who spend a lot of time on communication needs, Corey's department in particular. So bringing on someone that can help with social media management and being more proactive on social media, which takes up an incredible amount of time, and someone who can help with graphics and things like that. So that's kind of the thought. You'll see we'll get more into it. Thanks.
Question, Lori, are you still working?
I am, yeah, I'm 29 hours.
Is there any thought of you going full-time or do you have a desire to go full-time?
Yeah, you'll see that's part of the plan. Yeah, that's part of the 5-year plan, I guess, right?
Yeah. So we'll talk a little bit more about the timing of that and try to, optimize the dollars that we use related to communications. So good dispatch as well. But so that kind of wraps things up from the department perspective. If y'all don't mind, I wouldn't mind taking a quick little 5-minute break now, and then we can dive into some of the models that we have put together. So we will reconvene. I have 11:34, so let's reconvene at 11.
non-secured one, which is Matthews Town Hall. Oh, if you get that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Pennington, you have the numbers that Commissioner Whitley's asking about?
I do. So the question, as I remember, Commissioner Whitley, was what's our total staffing numbers, people of color, number of women, and then also highest ranking positions for each of those classes, as I recall. We are 65 sworn with 19 civilian, puts us at 80 with 84. 22% of the organization now is of people of color. So we are currently at 30% of our employees are women. Of that, 17% are in the sworn division or sworn ranks. Highest rankings we have, there are 2 people of color in positions of supervisors. That includes sworn and non-sworn. There are 2 females in supervisor positions. Those are non-sworn. 1 female in a command position, which is non-sworn. We do have a black male being promoted to a supervisor position here in the next couple of weeks. We have promoted 2 females to the rank of detective. We have an additional female being promoted to the rank of detective in a couple of weeks. And we have 1 person of color been promoted to the rank of detective currently. Yes, sir.
Thank you. All right, so we want to move into the budget forecasting model because, you just heard a lot of information. You heard a lot of needs, and it can start to feel really overwhelming of how are we ever going to fund all of these requests and really viable needs in a manageable way. And so we wanted to start to put to paper a plan that we think will move each department forward to the place where it needs to be and allow them to keep up from there. In order to do that, there were a lot of different factors that we have to look at because budgets are not static. We do have some increases in revenue that we feel like we can rely on. But in some cases, that is not enough. So put together a budget forecasting model that we hope becomes sort of a living document that is something that is going to be beneficial for us to use on an ongoing basis from this point forward. So I wanted to spend some time with you just going over the model, how it was built, what assumptions we have based it on, and then can start to get into some of the requests that you heard and how we have sort of laid those into the model in what we think is a manageable way. So as we move forward here, we started, and I'll just make sure that, okay, that I can move. So within this model, we started with town population, and we thought that that was a good thing to put in there just to be able to demonstrate the growth that this town continues to see year over year as more development comes online, as people move into the community. So in looking at Census Bureau data back to 2010 and the growth patterns that the town saw between 2010 and 2019, it averages out to a population growth of about 2.22% annually. And so we have plugged that in to demonstrate what we expect the community will continue to build out at over the next number of years. Property valuation, though, as our population has gone up 2.22% annually, the property valuation, so essentially the value of all of the parcels within the town that our tax rate pays on, is growing at a slower rate than our population growth. So when we look back to 2012 and so over the last 9 years, we have averaged only a 1.8% increase in our property valuation year over year. And that's when you hear us talk about natural growth in our tax rate. This is where you get that. So as a new subdivision is built, as a new apartment complex or a new commercial development comes out of the ground, that is taxed in that year, and then it helps us increase our revenue without necessarily having to change the tax rate. But if your property valuation is growing at a slower rate than your costs are, or that your population that you're serving is, then you're not going to always be able to keep the status quo with a flat tax rate. So this is really just meant to show the expected growth over time, but I do want to call attention to FY 23-24 because we do have the revaluation coming in that year. So as many of you know, Mecklenburg County historically had a revaluation every 8 years, and that was an opportunity to adjust the tax rate based on values. They are moving to a 4-year schedule, which will give us an opportunity in 23-24 to very likely see another significant increase in our property values that will change the amount of revenue that we receive from our tax base. So we have plugged into this a projected 20% increase in property values in FY 24. That is based on a preliminary conversation that Hazen had with Ken Joyner with Mecklenburg County as far as what we think we could reasonably build in. But this model is again meant to be a living document. So, if it turned out to only be a 15% increase, we can change that and see how that affects the necessary tax base that we will need, or the tax rate that we will need in order to fund our services. Yep.
A question. So I like the idea of that Mecklenburg County decided to go with a reval every 4 years.
Very helpful.
Very helpful. And you're projecting a 20%, so that's 5% a year growth in the home values, correct? Which is conservative, actually. Okay, thank you. I just wanted to be clear on that. So that's 5% a year times 4 years is where they come up with the 20%.
That's correct.
Thank you.
So the next entry is just a calculation based on the property valuation within the community, and the tax rate that we are charging results in the ad valorem tax revenue. And we collect on average about 98.8% of tax bills that are sent out. There's always a little bit of a loss, or if somebody appeals their valuation, there may be a little bit of a loss there. So we have tried to make that as accurate of an actual number as possible. Do you have a question?
I have a question for Hazen. Have we, since you've been here, 15 years? 18? Yeah. Okay, 18 years. Have we always gone revenue neutral during the evaluation? We have. And how about before you came on board, do you know?
I don't know. The only thing the law requires is that we publicly state in the budget ordinance what revenue neutral means, so that the public is aware what the tax rate would be if you weren't going to raise taxes.
Thank you.
So currently the auto tag fee is another revenue source for us. It is at $25 per vehicle. We cannot go up to 30, but that is another area that right now it is just flat revenue year over year because we've kept it at $25, but that is at least a small opportunity to potentially adjust revenues if we want to change the tag fee amount.
Thank you, Becky. Isn't it safe to assume that as our population grows, the number of homes grow?
So it would be, but we have not seen them in the revenues in the last few years, and so we have just kept it flat. So that is something that the model is intended to be a living document. So until we start to see that growth in what we're actually receiving from the county, we didn't want to build in the natural growth. But you're exactly right. That is something that could at least trickle up in revenues every year. But if it matches population, it would be about a 2% growth annually, which is not going to be a big needle mover as far as creating significant additional revenue.
Thank you.
Welcome. So local option sales tax revenue, this is the revenue that we receive from the county on a proportional basis. This sales tax revenue line is pretty hard to predict, actually. We have had some very wild fluctuations in the tax revenue that we have received every year. We anticipated a significant hit to this line in the current fiscal year because of COVID, and have been pleasantly surprised at just how strong these revenues have been coming in. So in talking with some of the other towns around us, we felt like we could reasonably predict a 3% average growth in revenue in this line. But when you look at the historical trends, some years it has been as high as 11%, and others it has been completely flat. So it's a bit of a wild card, but we felt like it was something that building in a 3% growth was reasonable to expect as we move forward with the cost of doing business. And unrestricted intergovernmental, this is your telecommunications tax, your utilities, your cable TV funds that come from the state. This is also a little bit of an interesting number where if you look back over the last 6 years, we are technically seeing a little bit of growth in this line, but we have seen reductions in the revenue every year the past 3 years. So we actually expect the reduction trend to continue as we receive less and less from the state, but are still expected to produce the same level of service for the community. And so as that revenue trends downward, that will put additional pressure on the revenues that we do have control over in order to make it up and continue to have the same amount of money to provide our services. The annual solid waste fee is what I would say an opportunity area for the town to consider. 2 of our neighbors in Mecklenburg County do currently charge a solid waste fee. Davidson charges $201 per single family residence for solid waste. Huntersville is currently around $84 for a single family for solid waste. And right now, as you know, the solid waste charges that we incur and have to pay Republic every year are completely absorbed within the 28% tax rate. And right now, our solid waste budget is about $2 million annually, which is equivalent to 4 cents of our tax rate is going directly to solid waste. So this is an area that if the board in the future wanted to consider starting to assess a fee that would show up on people's tax bills, this is an area that can create significant relief in your tax rate by charging people directly for that service that they receive.
I would support looking into that. In other words, our garbage pickup and recycling is free in that we're absorbing it as a government. I own some properties in unincorporated Mecklenburg County, and because it's considered unincorporated, there is no garbage pickup. So I have to pay on the side Waste Pro to pick it up. And it's roughly $25 a month per house. And so it is substantial. Whatever 25 times 12 would be your retail price of that.
If just as an example, if we were to charge the equivalent fee, that would be $300 a year. So multiplied by the number of accounts that we have, that would generate $3 million of revenue. And you can see this tax rate up here was at 29.5 cents with no solid waste fee. Not suggesting we go from $0 to a $300 solid waste fee overnight, but as an example, it just demonstrates what an offset it can create within the tax rate by moving to a more of a fee basis for solid waste.
Sure, and now that I do that math in my head, $25 a month times 12 is 300. So maybe wow. I think that would be a strong opportunity.
What was the reasoning why this hasn't been done before, why we don't charge for it?
So the traditional argument every time we bring this up is board members would say you cannot take fees off on your taxes. And I don't know, are property taxes still tax deductible? Okay, so that was the general argument, and it pretty much died after that statement was made. The only thing I would add is that if you go back to the original state law, and I do vividly remember it's called State House Bill 111, the intention, they asked that people start thinking about solid waste as a utility. Like water and sewer is a utility. They wanted communities to move into considering solid waste utility too. You would see, like, we don't run water and sewer business, but if we were in the water and sewer business, you'd have a sewer bill, water bill, or fee, water bill, sewer fee, and then you have a solid waste fee. This community has decided to do it differently, but you could do that and just vote on the tax rate as an annual fee.
How long has Davis and Huntersville been doing this?
I've watched Davidson's, it's been a while, and then I've watched Huntersville. Looks like Davidson's at 100%, and then Huntersville has crept theirs up over time. Sorry, just remember $1 raises about $10,000. So if you said $10 would be $100,000.
Yeah. Go ahead. I have a question too. Do we have a rate for businesses that use curbside pickup, not dumpsters?
Okay, so those are the downtown. There's about 200 accounts, as I recall, that are downtown and have a 90-gallon car, and they get, there's no fee for that either. We absorb that in our tax rate. Now, just so if you have a dumpster, you got to pay for that. You got to work that out with, what's that? 300, okay.
So no, I guess I was asking that because in Charlotte, businesses that have curbside pickup, I think, pay for my dad's office is like $225 a year.
Yeah, we just sort of totally tax rate up to this point.
Hazen, did we ever see that big increase in tipping fees that they were saying were coming? Was that ever realized?
So we have had increases in tipping fees, but they've been incremental. The county does a pretty good job of letting us know ahead of time what that's going to be, so we can put it into calculations for the budget.
Okay. So in building out the model, you can just see the total that this creates for what we would call unrestricted revenues. So this is essentially dollars that are available to support our general fund operations without restrictions. So this does not include stormwater fees. This does not include Powell bill. Those other items that have a dedicated use. Those are carved out of these calculations because they are not just free dollars for us to use to support general fund operations. And then those show up in this line here. Of our annual budget, we are projecting that in FY22, about $4 million of our annual budget will be in the form of those restricted funds to pay for other things. So what we wanted to do, again, was to start to lay out for the board a plan that starts to build out what the departments are asking for. And so wanted to sort of divide up the types of additions to operations so that it makes it really clear where the money is going, what becomes a recurring cost, what may be a one-time cost. And one area that we have to make sure we are building into our budgetary needs is any new debt service that we take on. So this board approved the, looking ahead to FY23 as an example, the board recently approved our rescue to be replaced. That debt service will start in 23. And so that is going to be an additional $160,000 annually that we've got to be prepared to pay for on top of everything else that we currently have in the budget. We also purchased 3 properties that we plan to refinance to pay back our general fund balance, and so we will start making those debt service payments in FY23. So they can feel manageable in a vacuum, but we've got to make sure that we've got the space to afford them and still fund our other operations. But I did forget one thing. I want to back up for just a second. In looking at our total projected operating budgets, the other thing that we built into this model is what we would call an annual operating cost increase. So we expect year over year, just if we kept a flat operations, didn't add anything else, didn't add any people, any new equipment, our costs are still going to continue to increase about 2.5% every single year. The big majority of that is employee raises, making sure that we're continuing to fund our pay plan as we move forward, and personnel takes up about 50% of our general fund operating budget. So when you are adding a 3% merit pool every single year to those salaries, that has to be absorbed year over year and is going to continue to just make our total budget increase over time. And then just general inflation, fuel can spike and be a much higher than 3% annual increase. The cost of goods, we've seen what's happening in the market right now. There can be significant variations, but we feel like it's safe to presume on average about a 2.5% annual increase. And again, everything in the model is intended to be connected. So as your budget increases, as your other revenue lines increase, that can offset your needed tax rate to some degree, but this is meant to automatically update to show you if your budget is this total, this is the needed tax rate that you're going to have in order to fund it. So in looking at FY 21-22, some of these items you will hear from in more detail from Hazen at the budget presentation in a few weeks, but we are trying to fund what we would say are the most emergent requests in the coming fiscal year. And if you want any more detail on any of these, please jump in and we're happy to talk about it. Otherwise, I'm just going to move through them really briefly and to continue to get through the model. So in FY 21-22, we would expect to be able to fund our deputy chief and fire departments, 4 patrol officers in the police department, which brings the police department to the 2018 recommended staffing levels. It does not get them to FY 22 recommended staffing levels, but it does at least complete out the studies here.
Are these numbers salaries and benefits?
They are salaries and benefits. That is the total annual cost. We are also looking to contract with a professional for crime scene processing. Right now, we are relying on CMPD for that purpose, and internal staff for the basic needs, and then when a true certified technician is needed, CMPD comes out, and that can be inconsistent at times as they have their own needs in Charlotte on a regular basis. We are looking to add an additional facilities maintenance technician to Public Works to help start to catch up on some of our outstanding maintenance needs and hopefully start to be able to move a little bit more into proactive maintenance. Right now, the staff can really only handle reactive and emergent needs. Also looking to add a landscape maintenance worker that will assist with the landscape maintenance around town. And then reclassifying the telecommunicators, this number would be spread out across the entire division. Right now, we are continually hiring, training, and then losing staff because they are able to get a higher paying job with our competitors. And so it's just been a revolving door. In some cases, folks are leaving for 25-cent an hour pay increases. And so that $500 a year matters when you're at that level of the pay scale. And so every little bit, this would fund a 5% increase across all positions within that division. So those are what we would call recurring costs. And so built into this model, those then are funded automatically in the budget totals for the following years because we are taking on those staff. They become ours. We keep them year after year. And so we need to continue to fund them as we move forward. We also have a variety of one-time expenses. So we call this capital outlay. These are directly related to the additions of staff that we have in this budget. The one is providing a vehicle and outfitting the new deputy fire chief. And the other is if you take on 4 new patrol officers, they have to have something to drive. And so this would be for additional cars beyond our standard purchase of new vehicles every year in order to make sure that we have enough vehicles for the new staff. So in this model, those totals are taken out because they are a one-time cost, so they don't show up in FY23. They are removed, and then the new one-time costs for the next fiscal year are in that total budget. We also want to be mindful of when we retire debt because that can be very helpful in being able to fund new operations. So if you jump forward, you can see that we do have some significant levels of debt falling off in FY24. But for the next couple of years, the debt we have is the debt we're going to have, and we will need to continue to make those payments to get that debt retired. So those are the core requests for FY22, and I'm going to keep moving if nobody has any questions.
I have one question. I saw those 4 police vehicles. Was that in that what we approved of the week? Because there was 10.
So that's completely separate. So we've got 2 things going on. One is that our current replacement cycle for police vehicles is once every 10 years, and that's creating significant maintenance costs because the vehicles are just too old at the end of their life cycle. So the 10 that the board recently approved was to start to shorten that replacement cycle to more of a 7-year replacement cycle, but that is just the status quo. So when we add the 4 new officers, we would need 4 new vehicles to go along with them.
And the other tabs on the bottom, what is ARP?
We'll get to that.
I know I'm jumping ahead, but I did want to mention ARP, American Recovery Plan. I was on a Metro Mayor's call the other day, and the governor spoke with us, and he was almost giddy with how much money they have. They have $5 billion. They have so much money they don't even know what to do with all of it. And he suggested, use this exact term, capital outlay projects. I know that we've been promised some of this money, but maybe we can get our hands on some more because they have a ton of money that they need to distribute. And the governor's looking at infrastructure, one-time capital outlays, not salaries, but, they literally have hired a staff to decide how to distribute this money. And I asked the question of the governor if the state was going to give further guidance. And he said yes, that it wasn't just a federal thing, that the state was going to try to work with the towns some more. So I would suggest that we stay very engaged with the governor's office because they have a lot of funding that's probably going to go to the squeaky wheel. So I think we need to raise our hand, and I know you're going to talk about how much we think we're going to get. We probably can get more, maybe some infrastructure money, maybe some paving money. Like I said, I use the word giddy. That's how we see it. You just, oh my gosh, we're just flush with cash. We have so much.
It's a great question. We're slated to get $9.7 million. And what's interesting to me is everybody's like super pumped up about it. There's no guidance yet. And I'm very interested in the guidance because if I was a bureaucratic administrator, I don't want people, buying planes for the town or whatever the crazy stuff is. The good news, I think, for our organization, we've done a lot of work on planning and whether it's the workflow study or, you've heard Chief Kenneberg's talks, so we feel like we have a lot of plans that can show, no, we're just not making this up. But here, Jay talked about the comprehensive plan. Y'all talked about last year's planning conference. So I'm hopeful once we see the guidelines that we'll be able to kind of show this plot line that shows, okay, we're just not making this up. Here's where it was in our organizational needs.
So to actually answer your question, Commissioner Miller, so how this model is built is because we don't have that guidance from Treasury regarding how we can spend the funds, this model is built on the presumption that we got no funds or that the funds that we do receive will not support or offset these operational needs as we move forward. So we'll get to a model in a little bit that shows some ways that if the Treasury guidance allows us to use the funds, we may be able to offset some of the tax rate impact that we will otherwise receive. But we felt like it was important because we don't have that guidance to work on the presumption that none of that funding will be eligible for any of these things. And if that's the case, then how much will we need to fund through our own means in order to meet these needs?
One more comment. Governor Cooper said that he serves on a commission of governors that are trying to better identify this guidance. And so he said he'll be working with the towns, through the governor's office to give us more guidance going forward. But definitely, again, just want to suggest that we stay very much engaged with the governor's office because they possibly get some more money.
That's right. That's great. So without any federal funds, the items that we went over in FY22 would require a 1.5 tax rate increase in order to fund them. And again, we'll show a model here a little bit later that if we are able to use federal funds for some of these things, it may lessen that need. But taking on that number of additional staff is just not something that we would be able to absorb at a 28% tax rate. So it would require $0.015 in order to move forward with those items. So looking ahead to FY23, like I mentioned a few minutes ago, we do have some debt service coming online that we will have to make payments for. That equates to about $0.005 just to make those debt payments, $268,000 across those two. So that is definitely creating some pressure on the general funds. But as we move down into recurring costs, there are some things that I think you could argue should be happening now. We would like them to be happening in FY22, but it just felt like too much to take on when we're already looking at $0.015. And so we have tried to incrementally lay out the expansion of some of these items to also be coming online in 23 instead. So one of them was what I mentioned a little while ago, was trying to tighten up our replacement schedule for police vehicles in order to turn our 10-year replacement cycle into a 7-year replacement cycle. We would have to start funding our vehicle program an additional $135,000 every year. That equates to 3 vehicles. We are also going to be in need of adding to our telecommunications staff. So this adds 1 staff person to that division in the police department. And again, when you see personnel, these are the total costs. This is salary plus all fringe benefits, health insurance. This is the total cost. That is not a base salary number that you see there. And to the mayor's point earlier in looking at communications, we do want to bring on a part-time content specialist first, is the current plan. They would be able to focus on the social media engagement at a lower hourly rates for some of that work, and it would free up some of Maureen's time to focus more on strategy, some of the more complex or sensitive communications needs that we have. So it's actually more hours in a week focused on communications by adding another part-time person instead of immediately moving up to full-time. But that is something that we will continue to evaluate and make sure that that order of things makes sense as we move forward. We are looking to start to fund, again, these are recurring costs. So on an annual basis, some additional funding to shorten our computer replacement cycle. Right now it is, I believe, a 4 to 5 year replacement schedule. Trying to back that down to approximately a 3-year replacement cycle. Some of these computers, you can imagine if they're in police cars, if they are, currently or constantly in use, they wear out pretty quickly. So having a little bit additional funding in that area, we think will improve the efficiency of those devices. We're looking to provide more assistance to CJ's department in FY23. We'll be adding to the concrete maintenance staff. Right now, if somebody's on vacation or is in training, they essentially don't have enough people within the division to do their work. And so they're having to pull from other divisions just to kind of do the basic needs. Are also really only able to cover repairs and not really do much in the way of new work. And again, also looking for some part-time additional assistance in landscape just to be able to handle that massive need. So 2 items here at the bottom are areas that in a perfect world, if we could implement these in FY22, we would love to be able to do so, but just in trying to prioritize what was most important, we felt like if we had to push these to start in fiscal year 23, not ideal, but we could. This is again if we don't have the federal funding available for these. So the first one is additional staffing in the fire department. Looking to add 6 positions to bring them to some minimal response levels. What Chief was talking about, 2 in, 2 out, more guaranteed levels of staffing on every shift. The annual cost for 6 positions plus all benefits is an additional $400,000. And then paving, this comes up every year that we are underfunding our annual paving budget, and to the tune of about $500,000, which is a penny in your tax rate. So this is something that could very readily be moved back or forward, I guess, to start in FY22. You would be looking at an additional penny increase in order to do that. So again, under the federal funding model, there may be some opportunity to implement these faster if the federal funds allow us, but we'll get into that a little bit later.
You've got a quick comment, and I know we've discussed this before, but if we use federal funds to pay salaries, when the federal funds go away, then we got this big hole in our budget.
And we've laid that out. We'll switch to that here in a few minutes. That does show the relief in the tax rate while the federal funds are funding them. So that's the other way to look at it, is you're able to increase your level of service quicker without having to pass that tax burden on to citizens for about 3.5 years. But then you do have to be prepared.
You gotta pay the piper at some point.
Exactly. So, you know, the way that we look at it, not to jump too far ahead though, is that, you know, these are needed increases. And so, you know, pay me now, pay me later. But either way, we do expect that those needs will be coming. And as far as the one-time costs for 23, the fire department has some needed upgrades and replacements in order to sustain compliance with their SCBA equipment. This is spread out over 2 years. You can see it half funded in 23 and half funded in 24. Some smaller renovations to Station 2 for some decontamination areas and some other small improvements to the station that need some attention. And then the ADA transition plan and then its implementation. This is an area that has kind of been under the radar to some degree. EA has a lot of legal requirements for how our facilities are built, how people have access. And so we are obligated by law to have a transition plan that does an assessment of every single facility that the town is responsible for. That includes sidewalks, that includes everything that we touch, and if it's not in compliance with ADA, we have to have a plan to get it in compliance, and the costs that are associated with making some of those changes. Sometimes it's as simple as taking a handle and moving it 3 inches up. Sometimes it's as complex as ripping up an entire hillside, regrading, and starting over. So we do have some additional costs to build out just the plan to understand what we need to do in some of our areas, as well as start to fund the implementation of some of the changes. And then the recommendation for a new class and compensation study is recommended to happen every 2 to 3 years. We will already be at 4 to 5 years by the time FY23 rolls around. So we will be due to start to redo that study to make sure that we're staying competitive with our pay. So again, no debt rolling off in 23, but as we make those additions to our general fund operations in FY23, we do expect that it would have an additional impact on the tax rates that will be an additional almost 3.5 cents over and above the FY22 increase. Again, a significant portion of that is your paving and your additions to fire department, as well as some of your debt service that will be coming online. But we do expect that to have an additional impact on the required tax rate in order to pay for those things. So FY24 gets interesting, again, because we've got that reval. And so as you can see, even taking on the items that are listed in FY24 that we'll talk about in just a second, you can see that as your property value goes up, a penny in your tax rate brings in more revenue. And so you're able to adjust your tax rate to correspond with that and still be able to meet the needs within the operations. So what we anticipate coming online in FY '24, two pretty big movers in the fire department. The ladder truck will be due for replacement, and that is a massive cost to replace that. Financed out, it is a $1.8 million cost. That if we spread those payments out, we expect that it will cost us about $267,000 a year to make that as manageable as possible. And then the other big mover is something that the board has talked about quite a bit, is paying for the construction and taking out the debt to move forward with Station 3 and start to get that online there off of 51. So we expect that we could spread those debt payments out over a 10-year period, but you are still looking at a $245,000 annual debt payment to pay for that station.
What does the math come out to when we add everything up in the next 10 years, what we're adding to the fire department? Do you have like the annual extra costs where they putting the fire department? Because I'm just doing some rough math. It's like we're approaching $1 million more pretty quickly for the next 10 years. So is that
I do not have it broken out that way.
okay. If you could give that some point, I mean, I shouldn't say that.
Does that include the capital expenditures, like, take, you want it on an annual basis?
I'm talking like the next 10 years, the annual cost, not the one-time cost, but the annual cost.
So kind of rough math, we added the 6 people to the station. So now we have 2 stations fully functional. Okay. And that's $400,000. And then what happens, we build a station, so you see that, whatever that $250,000 is, and then to staff that station is around I guess somewhere around $1 million to probably 1.2 to staff and operate it. So, and that may be kind of like, I don't know, kind of blows people's mind, but the way I look at it is we're 17 square miles, we're not going to get any bigger, we're quickly approaching a mature city, town. And so I don't see a time where we're going to ever need more than the 3 stations. I guess in theory, if you got dense enough, you could, but so that really, 3 stations builds out the stations for Matthews for the next 50 years. But we're right in the midst of it, right? We're in the next 7 years, 5 years, we're going to scale that.
You'd also be cutting the costs of the other one.
That's true. It's about $300,000. So and also the $400,000 for right now it's like $370 for this keeping volunteers and paying them $8 an hour. Right now we're getting a lot of mileage on it. That program go away too.
So your net would be about 1.3 million. So the reoccurring costs that we anticipate in FY '24 would include at least 2 additional patrol officers. So again, in talking about the chief's model for minimum staffing, I'll be honest, two may not be quite the right number. It may be closer to 3 every other year, but that's something that call volume will continue to be analyzed. Obligated, unobligated time will be analyzed to assess that as we move forward. So we wanted to at least build in the 2. I think Chief would happily speak up and say it needs to be 3, but we felt that we would at least need 2. Do you want to speak up and say it's 3?
Well, it's 3 at least to do the catch up for the 4-year back, right? From 2018 to 2022, it would require 6 instead of 4 this year, but we're trying to incrementally build it. And again, it depends on where we're at with the growth. If it remains 2%, if it starts to go down, we can adjust that. So the 2, I think what Hazen and I had talked about was a fair number for now, but would have to be evaluated.
Yeah, this is not, the staffing model the staffing study has helped some of this is, to me, it's not science, because one of these population estimates, we're gonna get an actual population here, but all these are estimates over 10 years, right? You do it, on whatever 10-year cycle. So that's one component of it. The other one for me, and we haven't talked about it, and I'm okay really not fleshing it out before it comes to y'all, is response times, right? That's very important, like, and if it's bad, that's a very important statistic too, but I know in the study, they hadn't scrubbed the ability to get the word emergency to the department. I can't remember the percentage, but it was very slow. So we don't have our own call center. So I think there's a number of factors, and that's why I'm a little less reticent to say, here's a number. The town is going to grow, that's for sure. So I think the good news is this is going to be 1 year. And then every year we're going to reevaluate it. You use different assumptions, you get refined, and we'll talk about it again. So this is only a 1 year commitment. Everything else is fine.
We do anticipate in 24 needing to add to our HR departments. So as we continue to add staff, that the number of people in our HR department needs to trickle up at approximately the same rates in order to just handle the workload within that department. And also hopefully be able to transition to some more proactive work. I heard earlier that there is a lot of just sort of basic compliance, and there's not capacity to do much from a proactive perspective. So want to start to alleviate and create space for that. Communications, again, as you saw the previous year, we're looking to potentially add a part-timer. We do anticipate the communications coordinator position eventually becoming part-time. You can probably pretty much interchange. You start with moving full-time and then add a part-time later. You add part-time first and then move the existing position to full-time. It costs about the same amount of money to do the same things. But we felt like there was value in bringing on the specialists and carving that work off of Maureen's plate and then sort of seeing what's left and making sure that the needs are justified across the board. Public Works, to Commissioner Urban's point earlier, there is sometimes value in contracting work out as opposed to taking on new staff. And so we do have an entry in FY24 for approximately $150,000 in additional expenditures that could be in the form of 3 new staff members who are in the streets division, who are focusing on some of the smaller jobs that a larger paving contract would not cover. Or do you take that $150,000 and put it into the contracted paving budget to increase the amount of work that is done through third parties? So either way, we think that the number would improve and increase the amount of work that we're able to have done to our streets. It will need some further refinement regarding what's the best way to go, or is it a combination of the two? And then you heard earlier from Jay, as the technology continues to become a major part of operations, the GIS role is very limited in our current setup. And we do think that by FY24, there is justification for a full-time GIS analyst, and they would support the operations of every department, utility mapping, assisting with crime mapping. There's a lot of capabilities with GIS that can improve efficiency that are currently going unutilized with our current staffing. The one-time costs, we talked about the SPDA upgrade being a 2-year process, some small additional changes to Station 1, some decontamination areas need some improving, and then the 2 patrol vehicles, those go along with the 2 new officers, so that's a corresponding increase so that the new officers have something to drive, and then a truck for the street crew. The good news in '24, in addition to the reval, is we also have some significant debt that will roll off. And so this does create an offset and does create some additional space in our general fund operations budget. These are 2 fire trucks that we bought some years ago, as well as Motorola radio replacements that will all be paid for. So that offsets the needed tax rate. So because of the revaluation, even when you add all of those additional things in, we would still project that we would be able to reduce the tax rate on the books by over 3 cents. So your new tax rate would be 29 cents as opposed to the 32.9 that was the year before. But keep in mind, those are on new property values. And so that is above a revenue neutral tax rate to be able to take on those additional operations. FY25, so this is the year after the revaluation. Just to kind of cut to the chase, we do expect between the natural growth that we would receive from those new property valuations and then the things that we're looking to take on that year, we do not expect that we would need a tax increase in FY24 to take on additional items, which is always good news. So absorbed into that tax rate, we believe we would be able to take on replacing another fire engine that will be due for replacement by that time, taking on the annual cost of those debt service payments, as well as the kind of main takeaway from these next few entries is that Station 3 is starting to come online. So to Commissioner McCool's points, it does start to increase the operational costs at a pretty aggressive level, but it is getting that station up and running with the personnel that will be needed. So in order to bring the full build out of the fire department online, it will require some reorganization of existing leadership to restructure how they're managing the various shifts at the various stations. 9 additional firefighters would be brought on, and to the earlier conversation, there's some real opportunity bringing on that number of staff, particularly if you're able to do it before the station opens, to create some space for them to be trained up and be certified while they're on our payroll, to then be fully functioning by the time Station 3 opens. And then there would be some operational costs to operate Station 3, and the only other add from a reoccurring basis would be an additional landscape grounds maintenance worker. I believe CJ just wants to focus on tree canopy, if I can remember correctly. Yes.
I know I saw this somewhere. What is the cost to build at Station 3, total cost? I heard it somewhere, but I can't.
Including the interest payments, you think we're around 2.45 million.
Okay, the total.
Yeah, not including land. So land, because the land was acquired previously, that's not included in that total.
I got you.
And the only one-time cost that we see at this point would be a truck for the new public works position to be able to get around and do their job. If a Chevrolet gets it funded, I don't know that we would complain if it has to be a Chevrolet. So what is significantly helping the tax rate in 25 is some of the offsetting reductions to our support for Idlewild would go away when Station 3 comes online. So right now, we support them to the tune of about $335,000 a year. So those funds would no longer go to Idlewild. They would be kept in-house to be able to help fund Station 3. And then we would anticipate, as Station 3 comes online and career staff are fully built out in the fire department, that the paid, it's interesting to pay volunteers, but volunteers do receive a stipend on the current program. We would still have a volunteer program, but it would move to a true volunteer in the sense of the word, and there would not be a stipend associated with volunteering time, but there would still be space for people who are interested in becoming certified or giving their time to the town at one of the 3 stations that is open.
If, when we put Station 3 online, what is the future of the Idlewild department? Is that going to be given to Mint Hill?
Chief, do you want to answer that?
Both Mint Hill and Matthews have had conversations with Idlewild that when Mint Hill Station 2 and Matthews Station 3 come online, Idlewild essentially goes out of business. But, you know, they do struggle to provide staffing. They use a combination of part-timers and stipend volunteers like we do. We've committed to make that closure, that transition as seamless as possible, provide a place for those people who are still engaged to be engaged. But the reality of it, when Mint Hill builds their Station 2, we've got double coverage in a service area. Station 3 is necessary to help the Windrow area, Idlewild Road toward 45. So we're shifting the coverage model. Idlewild becomes superfluous at that point. And what hopefully the taxpayers in both towns benefit by better coverage overall. And we've both committed to stop using Idlewild Road as the dispatch line. So Mint Hill would essentially cover calls up by Crown Point Elementary School. We would cover calls on 51 over toward Lebanon Road. It's a give and take.
What would be the future of the property? Would it be sold then, and who would get the money? Owns the land?
The property belongs to the Ivy family. It's under a lifetime lease to the Idlewild Fire Department. The school behind Idlewild has interest in the property. The town has a monetary investment in Idlewild's equipment. That equipment conceivably would become part of Mint Hill and Matthews, so it wouldn't go away. We actually own all of the radio equipment in 2 of their engines. We own all of the thermal imaging cameras and gas meters in 2 of their companies. We simply purchased it and gave it to them, so whoever got there would have state-of-the-art equipment.
Oh, no, none of the land.
No.
Okay, thank you.
Question. Are we expecting that Station 3 will be finished by fiscal year 24-25?
We're assuming that if you said go in FY22, we could potentially be in the station in 2 years.
Okay. My concern is that assuming we aren't going to be funding Idlewild, maybe somewhat premature, but we also have approved, there's 200 apartments coming to Liberty for Royal Park, 300, the new units out at Idlewild Park, plus in 22, school systems building a new elementary school within that realm. We have a lot of things that are happening. If there isn't enough emergency service coverage now, we're going to be in a bad situation if we assume that we won't be investing in Idlewild that particular year. For me, I guess it's more comfortable to put it out another year.
Yeah, that's a great point. So when we were putting together the model, I think the important takeaway to demonstrate this many years away from reality is that there will be an offsetting reduction in the cost to Idlewild eventually. But the exact timeline of what comes online when and what rolls off, we understand that it's very possible there could be a year of overlap or maybe 6 months of overlap that, maybe we're not quite ready to give up on Idlewild because we're not fully operational with Station 3. So that could create an opportunity for, say, a 1 year, almost double funding need. But, that's the kind of need that I think you could reasonably, do you look at fund balance? Do you look at some other ways to cover that little spike in cost while you're getting yourself fully online? Because you know that it's going away in the following budget year and you won't need it again. So we definitely know that the exact what comes when is super, super important, but the overall takeaway is that once things are fully up and operational, we will have the funds that we are currently using for Idlewild that will help us fund Station 3 once it's at its full capacity. Great question. So the final year, and then we will take a break for lunch, is FY26. So this does start to, be a little bit more gray as you start to be 5 years out of exactly what your needs are going to be. But we did feel like we still have a pretty strong understanding as we work with the departments and they look at their needs. So we would anticipate after that, the flat year in 25, that there may need to be a small increase into 26. Well, I guess it's close to 2 cents. I don't know that I'm that small. But that would be funding everything that is fully online, as well as then starting to take on the cost of the Regional Fire and Police Training Center. That was mentioned previously. This is a joint endeavor. Costs are preliminary at this point, but we do feel like that is a strong opportunity for financing over time. We can definitely extend those payments. When you're looking at building new facilities, it's very easy to take out debt because there's tangible collateral to take on that financing. What we see then in FY26 would be what we would consider the final staffing push for Station 3 to be fully operational. So you've got the 9 firefighters in 25, and then an additional 6 in 26. Gives you the 15 firefighters that would be needed to fully staff Station 3 with career personnel. The police department comes up due again for additional police patrol officers to keep in line with the staffing models that we've talked about. And then the communications content specialist would likely be looking to come on full time, again, presuming that the work and the need justifies that.
Good question, Becky. Can you go back to the one that shows all the tax rates for each year?
Sure.
So if we look at 21 current, can you just touch on how those are going to be accommodated? Because is that assuming that ARP money is going to fund if we don't have a tax increase?
So this model presumes no ARP funding.
I got you.
Yeah.
Hence the name of the tab, I guess.
It's okay. So yes, we do see some offsets potentially with the federal funding.
You're saying if we didn't have any, we would have to raise taxes this amount this year.
Yes, that's correct.
A model that will kind of fill in that gap for 3.5 years.
I think the mayor touched on this earlier, but if we use the money to not raise taxes and keep somewhat of a flat tax rate in 10 years, we're just going to go and roast your amount of money. You have a significant tax jump. You're going to have
3.5 years.
Yeah. So, I guess that's my concern is like if you're if you do that, you're gonna go from a flat tax rate to jumping really high, and citizens are gonna be like, hey, what the heck, this was paid for with the tax rate last year, what's going on?
Yeah.
So, I don't know.
Yeah, well, we'll show, and not everything that we need to add, is expected to be federal fund eligible. Again, we're gonna be waiting for that Treasury guidance, but, based on the little bit that we do know, we are likely going to be limited to items that we have wanted to implement or wanted to move forward with, but have not been able to. That appears to be the direction that it's going in. So as an example, Station 3 is not something that we can argue we have been ready to move forward with, and COVID prevents us from doing so. That's something that we've anticipated was always going to be a couple of years from now. So that's not likely something that we expect the federal funds would be allowed for. So there are going to be some things that can help offset your tax burden, but we don't expect that the federal funds will allow us to stay completely flat until they ran out. So we do expect some increases that we'll show you here in just a little bit.
One thing that I was looking at through this budget, about updating of Station 2, is it possible that ARP funds could be used for something where we have a station in place that may not fit the need for emergent, hurricane or pandemic scenarios that we can move forward with more quickly with the ARP funding?
It's possible, right now it's just such a big question mark. The model that we have laid out that we'll get to in a few minutes, related to potential ARP funded items, were really what we would call some of the big movers that we're really hoping that the federal funds will help us absorb for at least a few years. I could commit for the entire organization to say, once we get the guidance, we are going to absolutely be maximizing, everything needs to withstand scrutiny, right? The more we can, bring to the board that, move some of these things forward without having to pass it on to the taxpayers, especially if it is a one and done, and then it's not reoccurring. Some of those items, we would happily spend federal funds if we're allowed to by the guidelines, and then that is something that the board wants us to do and agrees that that's the right use of the funds. We happily take that and then have the corresponding reduction in the tax burden as a result. So the final items in FY26, we will be due to replace 2 fire vehicles. These are our squad vehicles that respond to the medical emergencies, the SUVs that you probably see responsibly flying around town on a regular basis. Along with the patrol vehicles, along with the 2 new officers, we would again need the 2 new patrol vehicles for them. We would also be due for some upgrades to our CAD and RMS system that would bring us into alignment with the county's programming and make interoperability improvements, and then some small increases to IT, some of our servers and backup data will be due for upgrades at that time. So as this model is built out, we would be anticipating almost a $32 million budget by the time we get to FY36. But the tax rates, again, taking revaluation into account, we expect the tax rate would probably be somewhere in the neighborhood of 31 cents. So that is this model. Again, this is what I would call a strong first pass at trying to lay out the needs, incorporate the expected revenue trends that we will have. We do anticipate, we hope that this becomes a living, breathing, working document that is something that you will see frequently as more information comes in, as the years go on, that anytime we have concrete numbers that we can plug in, we'll have that and then sort of continue to trend forward from there. But we do feel like this is a very strong start to growing, building out the operational needs that we have that will require general fund dollars in order to fund. That does not start to touch CIP needs over and above what you have listed here. We'll talk about that a little bit later today. But this is where we think we're going to need to be from an operational standpoint as we look down the road. So certainly happy to take any feedback on the model, on the, you're not committing to what the budget is going to be in 26. You'll only ever have, the next year's budget in front of you. But this is what we expect will be included in the budget requests that come before this board as we move forward year over year, and the justifications that we feel support them. So happy to take any feedback, and then we'll break for lunch, and we'll probably work through lunch just to keep us moving. We still have quite a bit to get through, but happy to hear from the board. Otherwise, we can conclude.
All right, let's break for lunch. Back there, Lori. Lunch. Keep going.
and get started again as folks eat their lunch and conversations about the federal funding have been sort of peppered into the day already. But we wanted to also build a model that starting to look at, well, we know that the funds are coming. We don't have strong guidance on what you can use them for. But in starting to kind of eyeball what we think might be eligible, we thought it would be an interesting exercise to just start to show the board how that may end up being able to play out if the board so desires. And so in doing so this model that you have in front of you does take into consideration some of the federal funding that we know we'll be receiving. And there is a potential, and I can't stress that enough, we need guidance from Treasury, but there is a potential that we could still make some significant increases to our operations in the next fiscal year while keeping our tax rate at its current rate of 28 cents. So under this model, it does show that we would be flat on our tax rate in 22. But then I'm not going to go back through these, but everything in yellow has been identified as potentially being eligible for the federal funding. And so what you have here are the exact same things that were listed in the prior model. It's adding our deputy fire chief, it's adding the 4 patrol officers, it's adding the crime scene contract. The dollar figures that you see listed are the retirement costs for those positions. We do have enough guidance from the legislation to know that retirement costs will not be something that federal funds can be used to pay for. So if you were to say take on a full-time position, you might be able to use the federal funds for their salary, their fringe benefits, their health insurance, except their retirement. So we would still need to fund that using town dollars. So what we are looking to potentially do, kind of the big additional changes for FY22 under this federal funding model is moving forward with our 6 full-time firefighters in 22 because they would be federal funds eligible instead of having to wait until 23 and pay for them ourselves. And we would also be looking to increase our paving, jumpstarting that in FY22, using $500,000 of the federal funds to add to that paving budget in 22 to get rolling with those needs so that our streets do not fall further behind. And so, we think that there's a strong argument based on how long these needs have been in place, that almost every addition that we have been wanting to make to the FY22 budget may be federal fund eligible, and by the time you pay their retirement, it pays for approximately 94% of taking those costs on if you're adding staff. Something like paving, vehicle purchase, those would be covered at 100% with the federal funds. So this model, if all of these things ended up being federal fund eligible, we would anticipate that we could keep the tax rate at 28 cents. And this budget does include an offset. There is about $1.9 million in federal funds that budgeted to pay for the paving, to pay for the salaries that we hope the federal funds could cover. So we do think that this is a real possible way to kind of jumpstart some of these operational increases in a way that does not pass that tax burden on to the citizenry. So under this model, we would see the tax rate staying at 28 cents for FY22. We would still likely need an increase in 23 for non-federal fund eligible additions. And then we are right at reval. So right in the middle of when federal funds are fully in play, paying for these salaries year in, year out, we would have the reval, which under this model could allow us to be as low as 20% out of that revaluation, still adding all of the additional things that you saw in that prior model are still coming online at the same pace, but it is taking a significant portion of them and covering them with federal funds for the duration of the program, which is scheduled to last through December of 2024. No, that is not revenue neutral. Revenue neutral. So before the reval, 2.5. So revenue neutral would be 24.3. Yes. So keep in mind, that's the year that you're scheduled to start paying for Station 3. You've got 2 additional police officers that year, even more funding for streets, all the things that we talked about before are coming online that year. That year was reclassified total communication. Yeah, so that is the 5% pay increase for all positions that will help us be more competitive with our pay. Right now, we're losing folks. We're hiring them, we're training them, and they're leaving. So that $25,000 would be spread out across all of the positions within that division. That is not highlighted in yellow because we don't think we can make an argument that that would be federal fund eligible. So that would be something that is just absorbed into the tax rate. Yes.
Now, going more of our employees on the right now.
Union County is one. We did some forecasting. It's been a couple years, so we would have to redo it. But Union County tends to have higher starting pay, so it's a really good recruitment tool. At least in the past, they were then kind of flattening out. And they had a lot of compression. So once you got hired in Union County, they weren't necessarily moving you up in pay, but it's really good at getting people in the door and luring them away from other localities because, people are seeing what's my pay today. They're not necessarily able to think about what might my pay be in 5 years if they're just trying to pay their bills at their current salary. So Union County, chime in.
Is that the sheriff department?
Sheriff's Department's good one, yeah.
Yeah, Union County's emergency communications is one of them, but I'll be honest with you, we did a study of dispatch pay in the area. We're amongst the lowest. So it's not just Union County, it's everywhere that seems to be pulling it away.
So under the federal funding, so what you see in FY25 is that have to start taking on the costs. So we would expect half year funding with the federal funds in that year. If the federal funds run out in December of 2024, it means that we could pay for half year salary of the positions that we've taken on during that year, but then we would have to start to fund those salaries for the remainder of that fiscal year. That does start to put some significant pressure on the tax rate compared to 24. And then at 26, we can fully funding these positions because the federal program is over. Everything is completely our responsibility. So as an example, take that $500,000 of paving that we've had the benefit of the federal funds covering 22, 23, 24. We think we can eke it out the whole amount in 25. So that's $2 million in paving that the federal funds would cover. But then we've got to add $500,000 to our budget in FY '26 to keep up that same level of paving. It would now be at our cost.
Becky, when I look at this, essentially, you would be asking our board to institute a tax increase in '22. In '23, '24, that would essentially be another tax increase. In '24, '25, that'd be another tax increase. In '25, '26, it's another tax increase. Is there any way, for what Commissioner Miller said earlier, that we can set a rate and I know the evaluation is problematic, but I don't think there's a good desire of this board to raise taxes every single year for 4 years in a row. Probably those of us that were still in office wouldn't be in office long if we raised taxes every single year. So can we do this once and average it, or once or twice instead of 4 times?
Hey, could you just, what if you plugged in 28 cents at rebound? Because that'll have a, going forward.
I've been around this area for a little over 30 years. I don't think any board has raised taxes every single year for 4 years in a row.
That's an interesting question. So I guess the theory is, could you use reval and offset future increases? So you can kind of, here you see it's probably the worst word.
Yeah, make the reval 28 or 29, just leave it there for several years. I don't know, you don't need this instantaneously. Yeah, I don't think we need this instantaneously, but there probably is, I'm sure there's a number we could institute a reval and do at one time that would hold us for several years.
I guess my question is, what do the surrounding 6 municipalities do? I mean, are they, like I said, we changes every year, or is it, do they say flat? I mean, what's the?
So we are one of the slowest growing towns of the 6 towns. And we can get that to verify all that. But the great northern towns are growing, and also Mid-Hill, they're all growing at a higher percent than we are.
Population or money?
Tax value.
Huntersville is just absorbing everything just based on organic growth. And they're just growing so fast that they don't need to raise taxes. I mean, they just get so many more people paying taxes every year.
And as I've heard, traditionally what I heard is Matthews was the first community to be like suburb, let's say a field of Charlotte growth back in the 70s and early 80s, which does make sense to me, and Midfield's trying to kind of see it down. But I'm not sure about Pineville because they've been around a long time and they are pretty much small. That's what's I think interesting about this model, and I do before we do, I do want to make sure Peggy gets her due, because she's worked very, very hard on this. Obviously, the department heads gave her the information, but this thing, they don't look at it, is Becky's. And it's great work. It really is good work. And we're going to be able to play with it, for lack of a better word, strategically, right? That's because that's what you're asking, is a strategic question. And looking out 4 or 5 years instead of 1 year at a time thinking, oh, we're in this bind, you have to raise taxes and maybe other mitigating circumstances. So here's an opportunity to think thoughtfully and plan forward as an organization.
And I think, our boards over the years, certainly since I've been elected, have been very fiscally conservative. And so we're probably complicit part of the problem because we keep saying, you say, I need 3 cents, and we go, we're going to give you a penny and a quarter. So you're always in a bind, you're always behind the 8 ball because we never fully funded what needed to be funded. So. Hazen, I asked you the other day, I don't know if you had a chance to check this, do we know what the tax rate is in Cary? Because I find that Matthews is continually compared to Cary. I think their tax rate is like 50 cents or something. It's a lot higher than ours. You know, they're always doing these great, huge projects and opening big parks and community centers and things. And Matthews can't do that. I think their tax rate is significantly higher.
So Becky's joining on that, and I was going to ask you to the Excel spreadsheet. That's a big time kudos to set up that model. Why didn't we have that 20 years ago? And figure it all out. I guess one of my questions is, we don't get out of elementary.
High school, I was in high school, right?
But Excel's been around for a long time. So why, I don't like the money throwing the billions of dollars out there anyway, because it just seems like it's a bad thing. I mean, it's going to overheat the economy. We already have problems as it is. And so what's the purpose of it, for example, of putting money into personnel as opposed to money being applied to capital projects? Is it because this ARP doesn't allow you to put money against capital projects? I know you said 500,000 to paving, but well, why couldn't you advance capital projects and do those and do the personnel through the normal tax increases and things of that nature?
So you certainly can. I think what we were wanting to do with the model is take a little bit of guidance that we have from Treasury, which is that you can fund governmental operations for things, including personnel, that you would have wanted to move forward with, but maybe have not been able to because of the pandemic. So take, completing Chief's 2018 workload analysis, or building out some of our fire personnel needs. Those are things that we know would pass an audit, as far as these are not new. We're not making them up. We're not suddenly saying, free federal money, let's add all this staff. These are things that we have needed. And so we know that, again, based on the little nugget of information we have from Treasury, they will likely qualify. And we do know that, the tax rate is obviously very important to the community, is very important to elected officials. And so it is a way to bring those people online to start to meet those operational needs in a way that does offset the tax rate for at least the 3.5 years that the federal funds will be in place. So you're able to increase operations, get those things rolling, meet those community needs, but it doesn't come due to our taxpayers in Matthews until 2025 and then into 2026 at full rate. So that being said, you absolutely can. We can back all these out and say, we are going to, push on the tax rate in order to add these staff members because we want to take the full 9.7 and put it on capital. That's certainly something that the board can do if we want to. It just felt like some of those capital needs, we have not had as clear of a plan. They have been sitting in the unfunded, we know we're going to need to get to them eventually, but we haven't really pushed around anything tangible. So you could argue a Greenway, for example, have we really had a plan to move forward now? We just haven't been able to because they've been so tight. I'm not sure that the argument is quite as strong. That being said, in everything that we have laid out, if we did everything that was on the list, and that includes over $2 million in paving, There's a dump truck in this, that's $170,000. There's a comprehensive plan update for $150,000. Take all that, if everything that was highlighted in yellow was done, it would eat up about $5.7 million of the $9.7 that we expect to receive. So to that point, there's $4 million left in play, over and above what is already on here that we have not even begun to determine how to spend those dollars. So we want to wait until we get the Treasury guidance to be able to know exactly what parameters we have to work within. Then there's definitely going to be a lot of discussions that this board is going to need to have regarding how best to spend the remainder of those funds.
Just what I don't understand is, I don't know what the goal of this is. Is it 5 votes? I mean, I'm going to be real honest. Is it throw money out there and 5 votes? Because I'm wondering if the citizenry of this town and other towns were thinking this money was to go into the system to prime already overheated pump. Okay, so I would expect the money to go to paving, so thereby it goes to John Smith Paving, a citizen who employs other people that work on his crew, that buys him the new truck, that then GM builds. See what I'm saying? And so it seems like capital projects would be what the general public sees as the way to keep the system going. The problem is we've overheated the system. So we're telling CJ to go out and pave, but we already can't get paving because we're already doing so much paving, and it's getting astronomical. It's getting astronomical in cost to do that, and labor costs and material costs. So we're perpetuating a really bad thing. But I guess my thing is would not capital projects be more the concept behind this? You have the money. What's the best way to spread it around and get the best bang for the buck in getting it back into the economy from that aspect of it? And I guess the other approach you're taking is, well, what's the best way to get the personnel, staff, and operational of the town solid? So I guess the bigger question is where do the constituents think that money needs to go to? Because it's their money. It's my money, it's your money, it's her money, it's Ken's money, et cetera.
Sure. And that's fair. You know, again, we are looking at a little bit of a black hole with not having guides from Treasury yet, but you know, you can argue that you're also putting people to work by creating those positions. So, you know, it's employing more people who want to be police officers, it's employing somebody who could be a deputy chief for us. So are still, you know, taking that money, and then that person is getting a mortgage and they're going to the grocery store, and you know the money is going out into the community in a slightly different way, but it is putting people to work just in a different fashion. So you know, this is absolutely one scenario that the board could say, you know, this isn't what we want to do. We want to do X, and that's totally fine. But we did feel like this was a way, particularly if keeping the tax rate at 28 cents in FY22 is a priority for this board. It is a way to do that while still moving the operational needs of the organization forward. You know, I don't want to steal any of Hayes and Thunder in May, but you know, we don't feel like we can wait another year to make some of these additions. And in order to make them, it will require additional revenue. So if the board doesn't want to spend federal funds, or maybe we can't spend the federal funds on some of these personnel needs in Q2, then we do anticipate that it would require a tax increase in order to start to meet those goals.
And don't you think too that part of this ARP funding is to sort of shore up the organization so that future emergency scenarios we're prepared for? You know, I guess I'm glad to hear that people feel like the system is already heated up, because my family and I know we haven't seen anything heat up yet. We're still waiting. But of all of the stresses we've had for the past year, it would be nice to see some organizational changes in place that, like an emergency operations center, so that we can feel secure at least in the responses we get as, we have more frequent hurricanes, more frequent, probably another pandemic.
Sure. So to go back to the mayor's question earlier, I did manipulate it so that if we were to go to 28 cents in 24, and again, this is under the federal funding model, you would be at a flat tax rate in 22. You would need approximately 2 cents in 23. With the reval, you would be rolling your tax rate back, but that is not a revenue neutral number. And that builds capacity. So what this is saying to me is that in 25, there would be room, if you cut this at 28, that means that there would be revenue available to do some one-time expenses in that year that we do not currently have plugged into the model. So it could be flat in 24, essentially flat if you cut it at 28 and 25, and you wouldn't be looking at a tax increase again until 26, and it would be approximately.
Okay, the other way to look at it is in this scenario is this, if you kept it 28 year, you're pre-funding that number there. But just know that equals a 20%. People will point that out. You say, look, we're keeping it flat. So you say, yeah, but what you're doing townwide, it averages out to a 20% tax, 20% property tax increase. And people will say that.
That's fine. I mean, it's obvious that at some point we're going to have to raise taxes, but I would prefer to do it once rather than every year. I mean, if you want to see a couple of those hanging from the flagpole up front, I mean, as elected officials, we just practically cannot raise taxes every single year for 4 or 5 years in a row. Just can't do it.
Keep in mind that we have not raised taxes the last 2 years. Is that right? We've been at 28 or 20, 21.
My personal preference would be like to see that number where you had 28 initially to 24. Or 23, I think that's where you went to 28. Just like make that like 28.5, and then we can hold that tax rate for 3 or 4 years or 5 years. That'd be awesome. Yeah, I don't think we're fooling anybody. I mean, they're going to know that their taxes are going up when they do the rebound.
Not everybody does. I mean, some people don't even know.
We should be transparent and let people know what's going on. That if there's an expectation of the quality of life here in Matthews and competent, fast response times for police and fire and EMS and all that, we have to have the funds to do that.
So again, just a little bit of rough math. This is not a perfect addition to this what if scenario, but under that, if you did go to 28 to 24, you then stayed flat in 25, you'd be at about a penny. 26. So that, you're exactly right. As we built out the model, Hazen and I had some good conversations about essentially do you front load and use the revaluation as the opportunity to anticipate that the federal funding is going to be ending and anticipate that you're going to need to start to take those costs on as it runs out. And so the reval really comes at a potentially perfect opportunity to plan for that so that you can then keep it steadier as the federal funds run out, and then you do start to get some reprieve on paper as far as what that tax rate is. So you are fully absorbing all of those items that we had identified for potential federal funding on paper, just under a penny tax increase in 26.
So my question was, is we went to 28.5, 0.285 and 23. kept that consistent? 285, could we not have to raise the tax? 6.
That,
And we
yeah,
get all these.
yeah, and
Gymnastics.
I would say the issue that you've got in 23 is how many things you're trying to take on in 23. So to carve a penny and a half off of that, it's about $750,000 in the things that we're saying we want to bring online in 23. We can't touch the debt. The debt is coming. So it would be looking at the things in 23 and cutting $750,000 from these expenses.
I was saying make it 0.285.
In 23.
In 23, instead of 0.280, make it 0.285. Have a number.
You're in 22.
We're starting with the first year, right?
Yeah.
And the ending year.
Yeah, this is,
Okay.
yes, yeah, I'm sorry, so you're referring to 22.
So I thought what you were saying was if we don't raise, we can do the budget without raising taxes for 21, 22, if we use the ARP money. You're saying in 23, we're going to have to go to 30.
Can we stay with the first year? Right now, we're in 2021, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so I think what we're referring to is the initial year, the July started.
Do you want this to be 28?
No. My comment was about 23. I was saying in 23, when we hit the rebound, can we make that 20? Okay, 24. In 24.
Why do we call it 24? It starts from 20, because you always, fiscal year is always the last number.
Okay.
So right now we're in fiscal year 21, we're going to go into fiscal year 20.
I mean, this is so long down from now. I don't know how many of us will still be on the board then, but in 24, if you made that number 0.285, my question was, could you not keep it 0.285 for 3 or 4 years and not? I mean, there's just.
We can do that math, and this model makes it work.
Yeah, I mean, I don't expect you to do that right this second, but the fewer number of tax increases that we can have is the better. So let's take advantage of the opportunity at the reevaluation year. And
One big one's better than.
for my, I'm one person.
I agree, one big one, but it gives you time to prepare. It gives you all these years to talk about the quality of life, the amenities, the town, the whole yards, and to work with the general public to understand that we're gonna have to make a critical component change here. And the reality is, we're still the lowest in all these municipalities. The other delta is, we don't know if subsequent boards in 22, 23, 24, take on maybe a more mixed-use type of approach, and next you know, we're doing more infill, and we're getting a lot more tax per square foot, blah, 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 and that's not figured into this model. We don't know what the train might do too, except bringing in proactive growth development.
What's interesting to me about this is I think we've all seen towns that at one time were great and they're not great anymore. And to me, I wonder what happened, and I think for us, the thing at the end of the day, what we got to offer is our quality of life. And I do think the danger is if we're too cheap, that suffers because we don't have anything to offer. But if it's greenways and parks and special events and a police and fire that are doing their job and staff that is meeting the needs of being responsible, and we have nice streets. And so I think that's where we really, or all of us, have to be careful. I do think we can cheap ourselves into becoming a mediocre community that 15 years from now is like, Matthews, or you have downtown, it's migrants, people are walking around, they're getting around outside their cars, and I think we're kind of at one of these important junctures, like, what are we going to be like 15 years from now? Because the metropolitan area is going to continue to grow significantly.
I agree with you, Hazen, because I really think one of the reasons that, and I know that the downtown is alive and vibrant, due to the pandemic. It's everywhere. But if you ride around small town America, North Carolina, they did. We're not. And, you know, I look at taxes a different way than the mayor does. And I know nobody want to raise taxes, but at the same time, when I'm thinking back, Matthews was 26,000 population, now 34. And the things that has come to this community, I look around and I'm amazed at the stuff we have in this town. We're growing, and I know people hate changes, but change is inevitable. If you live, it's gonna change. You know, I used to have an afro. Change, not because I didn't want to wear an afro. Change, I'm bald now. But my point is trying to make it for hesitancy. Now, I don't believe in being cheap, but I don't know, and I think I got a pause on the citizens of Matthews. They want first class stuff. They want nice streets. They want nice shopping centers. They want nice restaurants. I mean, I've been amazed at. I was listening the other day, downtown Davidson, during this pandemic. Listen to this, and it blew my mind. Not one store downtown Davidson went out of business or had to close during this pandemic. Every store stayed open. Pretty much we did too, but we struggled a lot too. But so what I'm saying is, if we haven't raised taxes in the last 2 years, and if we're going to hold pretty steady in 22, and then the only part we're looking at is maybe 23 going up. I think the argument we can say was, listen, we hadn't raised taxes in the last 3 years. Give a bump, and then we're going right back to being steady 24 and 25.
Well, we're on the same page. That's what I said. I recognize the inevitability that we're going to have to raise taxes at some point, but I would prefer to do it less frequently. I don't want to raise taxes every year. I mean, that's going to cause a real problem for all of us that are elected officials if you start raising taxes every single year.
I agree with that. I
do it once and do a larger amount, and as Commissioner Irvin said, let's prepare them for it. Tell them what's be transparent, show what it's going for. But I don't think we need to raise taxes so frequently.
I agree with that.
Less frequently.
But when you show the citizens that this department is growing, fire department, because those are tangible things that they can see, and everybody wants police coverage. You know, when I call 911, I want the popo there. When the fire alarm goes off in the house, I want to hear, that little new wagon that we talk about we buying. I want them to come out. Now that we have Station 3, I can feel safer now, knowing that me and John, now Ken is in our district now too, but the 3 commission, when we call for some help, we're going to have some response within 7 or 8 minutes of the time we call. That's important to me, it is, and I think it's important to the citizens of Matthews to know that as we grow, we're going to have to raise some taxes to make sure within reason. You know what I'm saying?
So to that point, if you do front load during the revow and use one-time expenses to be balanced with your budget, right? You've got to be able to account for all the money that you plan to spend in that year. Under this scenario, again, for operations, it looks like we could be at about a 28.5% tax rate, and then it is static for a couple of years. But it definitely takes going well above revenue neutral in that revaluation year in order to get yourself high enough that you can then absorb what's coming online over the next few years in order to do that. But certainly it's possible, you know, whatever that rate is exactly, it's possible to set it so that it can then cover your recurring expenses, and as those costs tick up, you start to have less amounts available for your one-time until you hit a point where you need a tax increase again.
My argument is the same for the last 10 years. If we were at 28.5 or 30, because years ago we were at 33 and a quarter. Okay? If we stay at 28.5 or 29 or whatever balances the books on any given year, and we leave alone the reval, stay at that fixed 28.5 or 29, the value of the home would go up. Yes, we pay more money. Then you don't raise taxes, you don't raise taxes, you don't raise taxes, you don't raise taxes, you don't raise taxes. Now that the reval is every 4 years, and it's going up incrementally, let's say 5%, wouldn't that cover your 3% raises and certain expenses would roll off, et cetera? Budgeting can be a whole lot easier if you just stay based on the property valuation.
That's the beauty of this thing, is the board can take that 4-year look, say, guess what, in 3 years, keep it at X rate. In 3 years, we're gonna add these people, so y'all, you can defend to the citizens, here's why we're gonna keep that, and our intention is to keep this rate for the next 4 years, and here's the spending plan in the next 4 years.
So I'm not necessarily saying I disagree with what Commissioner Miller said, but we have to be cognizant that if you did that, and you kept saying it was 29, and you kept it 29, and your house went up 20%, then you're gonna get a 20% tax increase. What you pay is gonna be 20% more than you paid the year before.
Now, that's not your entire tax.
That's true.
bill.
That's true.
Mine is $450 on my house for Matthew.
Can't hear you.
Jeff needs a microphone to the gate.
Okay, well, like my tax bill, let's say, is $1,600 and change, $1,700 and change. I live in a modest home. But only 460 or somewhere in that neighborhood is the Matthews. So will it go up $100 every 4 years? That's $25 a year. WTP.
So, the bottom line is that the model helps us start to visualize that, and start to run these web scenarios and to see, what keeping that rate allows us to do, versus not. So again, we just wanted to bring this to you as a potential. The timing of the guidance from Treasury, is, coinciding with the budget presentation will be made. So it is quite possible that the budget will be presented before we have guidance from Treasury. So we have to move forward with the presumption that there's no Treasury dollars in the FY22 budget, and that's probably the way it's going to need to be presented. But it is quite possible that over the normal time period that you are discussing budget through your work sessions, the guidance will come out from Treasury, and we'll be able to make some informed decisions about how we want that to impact the tax rate in 22, with the plans for how we want to use those funds to start to take shape once we have more information.
So just to be, I see the mayor shaking his head. So the managers, unless we get guidance from the feds and say, guess what, all these things y'all are theoretically talking about today, that could keep it at 28 cents. So it's very possible, in the absence of that, it's very possible the manager's proposed budget would show $0.015 increase. If the guidance comes through like we think it is, we'll be able to recommend to you guys a 28-cent budget.
So we comment on that. I mean, we know it's coming.
Yeah, but we don't know
We
what.
know the money's coming.
But we don't know what the guidelines are.
I'm aware from everything that I've looked at that they're trying to be as flexible as possible. I mean, I think it's being overly conservative to say we're not going to get any money. I mean, we're going to get billions of dollars, I feel certain.
No, we're not saying that we're not going to get money. We know that we're getting the money. It's what are the rules for how we can spend the money. So, for example, if the rules prohibit us from being able to use it on personnel, let's say they say you can't use it on reoccurring salary expenses, then we can't add 4 police officers and we can't add a deputy chief in FY22 at a 28-cent tax rate. So we will need the penny and a half in FY22 if we can't use or don't want to use federal funds for those expenses. So we know the money's coming, we just don't know what the rules are. So we can't present a budget in good faith saying that we want to use federal funds for X when we don't know that we need to.
Hopefully we'll know before we have to pull the trigger. Because I mean, the last thing we want to do is institute a tax increase and then have the citizens realize we just got $5 million extra to spend or whatever.
Sure.
So that's not good.
The email I saw yesterday was, I think they're expecting the Treasury guidelines by May 11th, but you hear your budget on May 10th.
And
But just remember too, you know, the Treasury guidelines then also need to be interpreted. So you just don't know how clearly they're going to be written. I know the league and a lot of others are staying on top of helping us interpret. You know, you talked about some state resources to help us interpret, but nobody's seen what's coming from Treasury. So everyone's going to receive it at the same time, and then there's going to be a lot of work that's going to happen very quickly to, okay, well, what are the guidelines actually saying in a real world application perspective?
when Governor Cooper spoke to the Metro Mayors, he said that the governor's coalition that he's on is pushing for the federal guidelines to be as absolutely flexible as possible to let you use it for almost anything. So they're pushing. There's a lot of high level, governor level folks that are pushing to make that as flexible as possible.
So earlier today, the mayor asked me what the tax rate in Cary is on, it's 35 cents. And what's interesting about this is they went through a revow and they kept their tax rate at 35 cents. So they did not, a lot of the towns in Wake County reduced their tax rate. Cary did. Now, they must have done a great job of selling it to their citizens, to your point of why we need to keep it the same. But Cary did it, and so did Clint. Well, Clinton's in there too, but they're not. So that's an example of keeping it the same, but you got to do a good.
Cary is like the statewide poster child for change your paradigm, doing great things for their citizens. It seems like Cary's always building some new greenway or adding some new amenity for their citizens. That's how they're able to do it because they have a lot of cash.
Yeah, just a 35-cent tax rate would give us significant room to make this happen. Does Cary have a fire district?
They got fire department.
Looking at the few webinars that I've tuned into on ARP funding, it feels like a lot of it is supposed to go to health and human services and things under the county purview. So are you getting that same impression now, or are you feeling like there's more flexibility than human services?
So the way that we have seen the guidelines, it's that, the funds can be used for any of the following. Health and human services was one of the things listed. Obviously, that's not something that is under our purview. So where we have focused is some of the wording that I talked about, government operations, revenue replacement, the revenue that we have lost, that we can document. We would be wanting to hopefully add some funds back to fund balance, tourism fund balance to offset some of the lost revenues. So because that's not something that we focus on, we've That's not something that we would expect would be any kind of a mandate or requirement for how we use our funds. Okay, so, certainly there's a lot up in the air that those guidelines are going to play a large role in being able to determine. But we do want to move on and keep the day moving in just briefly reminding you, because we are running out of time, again, just reminding you that the model that was presented only includes what we would call, required debt service, as far as, we have to take on the funding to build Station 3. We've got to fund our fire trucks, but there is an absolute plethora of projects within our CIP that have no identified source for funding. So as this board and future boards move forward and decide to fund those projects, those items can then be plugged into this model, and we can have a really good look at what that does to our tax rate. So I think it will be very helpful for us moving forward. But we didn't want to build any of those other CIP needs into the model because they are completely up to the board regarding when, how, and if to fund. But in looking at, go ahead, Mary.
Can you state what some of those things are?
Sure. Actually, I thought I shared my screen. I did not, so let me share the screen. So anything that is listed within a year has a funding source identified, with very, very few exceptions. So if it is, as an example, the key segment A, it's $2.1 million that's coming in FY22, but we have the Windsor Run funds to pay for that. We are covered. We are in good shape. Not a problem. But anything that is in the right-hand column on these sheets does not have a funding source and is really a TBD for this and future boards to determine when and how to fund. With the exception of some of the transportation betterments, NCDOT's funding issues have thrown a lot of that off. We thought we had started to be able to plug in when we could expect to have to make some of our cost share contributions to NCDOT projects around town. But all of that has been shifted, and those have all been plugged back into a TBD future years column, because we just don't know, or in some cases it's going to be as late as FY31, which is beyond the scope of this listing right now. A big one that we will have to determine once we have better information are the betterments to US 74. That is going to be a significant cost that the town has agreed to shoulder. I think some of their formulations may or may not help us in offsetting some of those costs. But as it stands right now, we may need to be figuring out how to fund over $5 million in cost share improvements just associated with that one project. That, as it stands right now, we have no funding source identified. We do not have a direct plan in place for how to meet that expectation. And that is going to be a big one.
Okay.
Yes.
On the transportation part, back when we were talking, I know I brought up the intersection of Crestdale and Charles Street, where the railroad track for those trucks. And we talked about adding into this transportation rate to raise Charles Street so that I'd like to see them put back on there. I think we did announce them. I want to thank the cost that Susan and I was talking about. I was thinking like $300-some thousand, maybe $350. That sound right, CJ? It's the raised Charles Street right at the end of Crestdale.
Yeah, I think that was correct. We did bring it up at the planning conference, and at that time, the board's direction was for us to look at, getting with like Waves and other places like that to route trucks away from that intersection. not to move forward with that project. So I guess that's probably why it's not in there now. But if the board wants to bring that back up,
I'd like to see it back in there, just for number one, the dip on Charles Street that goes down in the valley there. I'd like to see it at some point, because there is a 100-year flood. And I know I've seen it twice in my 24 years there. That the water, and I'm not talking about going under, I'm not talking, the water is going underneath the railroad, but I'm talking about the road from Charles Street to fill it up with bigger pipes to take the water that's coming off of Matthew Chapel so that it can run through and bring it up, but at the same time, get that water off to there. And I would like to see that added back on there, just to take care of that dip as well as, because GPS still bring those trucks to there.
yeah, I don't know how much headway has been made on that. Is your concern with the water being high, is that concern for Charles Street or is that concern for Matthews Chapel?
Matthew Chapel Road, but at the same time, the problem is that the water can't get on the railroad track. If you know, if you go a little further down, if you go a little further down Tank Town, some years ago, if you look at the piping that runs under there, on the railroad track, it's 3 times as large as to look at. I don't want to think it's a 4-foot pipe that runs under there and Matthew, that right there.
They are much different, but they take a different drainage area. On that point, one thing to consider is for Charles Street, we now have a new access through the sports must get out. Matthews Chapel Road, that gets flooded, there's not separate access.
Right.
But that $350,000, I'm pretty sure did not raise, that didn't do anything to the drainage system.
It just took care of the intersection area there. Now, I really would like to see that back on the track, especially if we're gonna have $4 million extra expense on there. Let's take care of that problem, because I think we did an analysis over how many times the trucks got stuck and how many calls for service. I think the chief gave us that back about 1.5 years ago. But I would feel better, number one, because just for the railroad crossing, it's a lot of trains traveling through that area.
So, and it's very easy to add projects, so that is not a problem to get that on the list. Until the board made a determination to fund it, it would end up in that far right column, those costs, but it's certainly easy to add. So these are the transportation projects, and we'll talk about bonds here in just a minute, but there are significant town shares, or they would be completely at the expense of the town in order to start to move on some of these projects. Keep in mind the solid waste fee may be an opportunity to free up some general fund dollars to start to make headway on some of your capital needs without necessarily touching your tax rate. So I'm just going to scroll through and just point out, so in Parks, Recreation, and Cultural Resources, again, they do benefit from some tourism funding being eligible for a number of projects. And so we do have a good plan. We have plugged in the qualifying projects. Jeff?
On the Park and Rec, I see the 4 Mile Creek culvert. Is that the Greenway?
That is, the culvert is the Greenway, yes.
And that's is that 2 more years out, 3 more years out?
So we got an email from the county this past week that they might be ready to receive that funding actually this fiscal year. We do have those funds set aside in the capital improvements plan fund already.
Right.
So if the county needs that check, that is something that the board could appropriate and we can get that paid.
Can I get an update for you? When is that going to happen? When is that going to begin, the green line through the Trade Street? So originally it was going to be in tandem with the widening of the bridge. Now we're 3 years later, and it's 2 years away.
So, so if you remember, I guess at the very beginning, they were talking about doing 10 bridge.
Right.
But then they decided that they had to separate it out because of the funding sources and construction methods.
Okay.
So what they decided is once the widening is completed, then they would do survey on that and start design on the culvert underneath the pedestrian bridge. And that just opened, I mean, they just finished that project a couple months ago.
Right.
So now that one project is done, they can start surveying now, start design on the culvert project. And my guess is, it's probably, it would be hard to do in a year. It's probably 2 years out before that's done.
So the thing I would add about that is that 125, it seems like the county share was like 900,000 and our share was like 125,000. That number, that is probably 7 years old, 8 years old. I mean, I would hope we could count got so much more money than we do. And I would love to be able to stick at this 125,000, but I don't know, CJ, I wouldn't be surprised if our share came back 2 or 3 times more expensive just based on how expensive this culvert work is done on the road project that they just finished. So, I mean, I would say it's still a good return based on what we're doing for the community, but hopefully our number can stay at 120.
But again, when you start to look at these lists, when you move over into that far right-hand column, these are projects that staff have identified as being benefits to the community or potentially needed, or board members have identified these potential projects. But if it's in that right-hand column, there's no funding for it presently. And so the ability to absorb some of these costs would require us to be over and above those operational tax rates that we were looking at on the other model, or you're creating available funds with your solid waste fee. Bond referendums are always a good opportunity with some of these to kind of check in with the taxpayers and see if they want us to fund them. And if they say no, then we keep it in that far right-hand column and we move on. If they say yes, then that would create the capacity to potentially be able to move on to projects. But again, the important takeaway is all of these projects just sit idle. And the years pass, and there's not going to be a natural growth opportunity that we can see that would magically create the available funding to start to move on these projects. So, our best suggestion is if there are projects that are a priority for this board, or the board wants to move forward on certain projects, is we need to start to identify those, and then we can bring you options for how to crack that nut. Is it solid waste fees? Is it a bond referendum? Is it just a tax rate increase? But how do we move forward to actually start to check the projects off? Because right now the list just keeps getting longer, and we're not able to move on them, and the costs also go up. Most of these are projected out to a 2025 cost estimate, but that tends to be arduous at best in being accurate, just with the fluctuations that we see in the cost of construction.
Just have a quick comment. I would think that some of the low-hanging fruit, we could check the box. So when you've got some projects out here that are $6,000, the all abilities playground's pretty important. That's $100,000. I know the big ones that are, $5 billion and $2.2 million are arduous to say the least, but maybe we can take a couple of lower ones lower cost. Because we got to prioritize them, but as you say, the list just keeps getting longer and longer. We're not going to magically come up with $5 million with
and
$50,000.
And we have done that prioritization process at the board board recalls, feels like a lifetime ago, but all 7 members have filled out your prioritizations that we'll look at in just a minute. So some of that work has started to shorten the list to identify which projects might benefit from additional conversation and potentially moving forward with, and which projects we would just say, we're going to keep them on the list, but it's something that we would worry about a number of years ahead of time.
Is it your estimation that none of these projects will be eligible for ARP?
I think, again, those guidelines are going to be key, but I think you can make the argument, let's take Shawnee Park as an example. That's one that we have talked about and had plans for and, wanted to move forward with, but I think the cost has always felt overwhelming to boards as far as taking something like that on. So it's very possible that something like that could
I have a question about the sidewalk gaps. So $3 million price tag, and does that include adding public works staff? Is that number just for construction materials?
That was just construction materials.
And there would be a difference whether we're contracting it out or doing it in-house.
So cost-wise, it probably would be, we could probably do it cheaper, but we don't have the capacity to do it. We don't have the to do it.
And is there a list of sidewalk projects that's smaller than $3 million all at once, that if we're chipping away at things, like there are definitely priorities for sidewalks?
Yes. Yep, that $3 million was a total cost. As an example, if we were going out for debt, or if we were putting it on the ballot for a bond referendum question, we would want to group them together to get your total high enough to make the bond process worthwhile. But that $3 million is, I can't even remember how many projects Susan and staff identified, 30, at least 30, probably 30 projects. So yes, some of them are big chunks of the $3 million, and some are really, at the end of the day, a very small cost to fill in that gap. There just happens to be so many gaps around town that when you put them all on the list, it does start to be a very significant number. But to your point, you could absolutely start to chip away and lower that total and take a difference, at least in areas that we prioritize and are able to get to. On the public safety side, keeping up with our fire apparatus and keeping them in compliance is really the majority of what is on this list at this point. So we do feel like we've got a pretty good replacement plan laid out in order to have the trucks where we need them to be. But these obviously require that financing and then being able to absorb those costs into the budget. Because it is fire apparatus that keeps us in compliance, and the trucks have to be able to start when we go to turn them on. Some of those, you'll notice, were built in to the forecasting model, because we do expect those to be more of a must-do, if you will. Whereas a greenway, technically, if you wanted it to sit, you could, but fire trucks do reach a point where that's just not an option. That being said, I'm sure Corey gets his greenways at the same time he's over there giving me the side eye. So. And then Public Works, these are the truck replacement cycles for CJ. In most cases, these are not financed costs. These are replacing pickup trucks, replacing some smaller equipment. And there's a lot of pieces of equipment. Many of them are 15, 20, 25 years old in some cases. And they are just absolutely reaching the end of their life. So these are costs that we would hope could be absorbed within that forecasted model, just like fire trucks. You reach a point where you just have to fund these. So they're not necessarily something that would be the same type of conversation as a $5 million park and figuring out how to fund them. And public facilities, we do have some plans in place to be able to replace our chillers and our generators in the next few years. Starting to pay the funds for that training center, presuming that that becomes a reality. But there are a number of things on here. The downtown streetscape improvements have not been addressed. The fire station is on here. We've got to bring that online. That should actually be listed out and make that change. And then there's some items downtown that we have talked about. There's varying opinions on what to do, how to do it, if to do it, related to parking. Do you build out the parking lot behind the new Fullwood Market? Do you go the parking deck route at some point? There's a lot of outstanding questions that would need to be answered, and those would be significant budget pressures if we decide to move forward with those. And this just totals sort of our known costs, again, when you get down to be determined, across all areas, about $32 million in projects that we certainly don't expect to move forward with all of them anytime in the near future. But that list is only going to get longer if we don't start moving on.
Becky, one observation I had earlier was on a prior slide where we were on sidewalks and greenways, was a multi-use path along 51. And if we already have a sidewalk there along 51, then that really shouldn't be priority when you consider some of the other things that would benefit. That's an enhancement, but it was millions of dollars, and I feel that we have to add new items that will benefit the public rather than just make it a little bit wider. It's a want to have but not a need, as opposed to sidewalk gaps.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but it's my understanding that is when we widen 51, so that sidewalk would be ripped down. When it's put back, what we want to do is put back a 10-foot multi-use path rather than 5-foot sidewalk. And that's what we're doing in all the major roads in town. When we're taking out the sidewalk, trying to put in a wider multi-use path so people aren't having to ride a bicycle on a busy road.
Wasn't that itemized as a 51 enhancement?
Right, so it's considered an enhancement when it's something above and beyond what would be included with the CDOT project.
Where?
It's down near the bottom, I think.
It was the first line on the top. I don't know if it was this slide, the next one, or let's go back up towards the top. No, it's not that one. Is there one before that?
Are you talking about this one? He's right here.
No, that's the betterment. It was, I thought, a $5 million up at the top. I'm not sure.
It could be what you'd see on the left-hand side. There's the $4,900,000. That's not our cost. The our cost is on the right-hand side.
Yeah, but it didn't say betterment. It was a multi-use path on 51, I thought. And if I'm mistaken, then I'm sorry.
So, probably right here, Jeff.
Yes, all right, 3 million. If we already have a sidewalk, we don't need that.
So that is on the Nomont side of 51, where there is currently no facility.
Okay.
And that is the, and we've actually committed to that project with NCDOT. The board has committed to the $600,000.
I was thinking it was going towards,
on the street sites.
No, that's approved.
So I think I confused things. When he said 51, I was thinking 51 binding. This is the multi-use path that's in front of no line. It would tie into the Carolina Bridge. This looks like 1,000.
5363.
5969.
Yeah, that's the continuous code line has been delayed.
No. He's in 5763 is up here. This is Sardis and Monroe.
So the road projects generally start with the U. That's EV, which is a environmental, I can't remember what it stands for. The other one's EV, which is not roadway related.
We have committed to the 600,000. The board took that action and committed to paying that whenever the project is completed. So what we want to lead into then really briefly as we want to wrap up here for today is up here. Is just the brief reminder that, bond referendums are an option that the town has historically rarely utilized. We currently only have one bond on the books, and that was for our Trade Street improvements that went to a vote years and years before the project ever came online. So it's actually been quite a long time since the question has been posed to voters regarding whether or not they want to fund a project through the bond referendum process. We have identified, and it's in your packet, some projects that we think might be good opportunities to consider for a bond. And the reason for them to be on the list is that they rated highly amongst this board from a priority standpoint. And they are the type of project that is bond eligible as far as being able to take financing out to pursue if the bond was successful. And they are projects that we do not currently have the ability to fund in other ways. So this is not something that we want the board to make hard decisions on today, so much as a reminder that this is out there, but in order to move forward with something like this, it takes a significant amount of lead time. So the board has to make decisions about putting something on a November ballot. We have to have at least 6 months lead time in order to make that ballot. And so it is too late for 21, given it's a municipal election. You maybe wouldn't want to do that anyways. But if you want to move forward with considering the bond referendum question in 22, we would need decisions made on what you want to put forward. We would need that made within the next 12 months time at the absolute latest. Again, I stress the latest. We would happily have that information sooner if possible. There's a lot of different ways to think about your bond referendum timing. If you pursue it in 22, there may be a half-cent sales tax question on that ballot related to funding transportation. It's also midterm elections. If you put it on 23, you're back on your municipal cycle. If you put it on 24, you are on a presidential cycle. So pick your poison if this is something that the board is interested in moving forward with. But this is a very common funding tool that other localities utilize regularly to be able to move forward on some of the larger projects that you want to check in with your tax base and make sure that they want this project. And so if they vote to approve it, then we are pledging our full faith in taxing power. And it allows for extremely competitive financing rates because it's essentially a guaranteed repayment on the market of county basically can't default for all intents and purposes, because you're promising that if you had to raise taxes to pay for it, which is generally what you end up doing, then you are willing to do that because the voters have approved it. So it's a very powerful tool. It can create a lot of progress on some of these projects and spread our payments out over, I think the Trade Street is a 20-year repayment. So our annual cost for that project is very, very low because we're able to take so much time repaying the debt. But the project's done. People are driving on it now, and the repayment is really not painful on an annual basis. So really more an important reminder, and certainly if it is something that the board wants to continue discussions on, we would love to have that feedback so that we know to schedule additional meetings with this and potentially future boards to start to vet those lists and determine what and when you would want to proceed. I am happy to take any other feedback. Otherwise, we are at 2:32, and we don't want to be up any more for Saturday than we already are.
I have a question. This board will at some point in the near future consider purchasing the board program. Is that accounted for anywhere in your calculations?
It is not accounted for in the current tax rates. It is accounted for in the, I think I put it in the, I did put it in the bond listing as far as additional property question mark. So obviously that cost, if you had to make any improvements to it, that is something that could potentially space your payments out over time, or if you're making the purchase ahead of time, you might just do general debt financing, standard bank financing.
I don't think we can wait to put this bond.
No.
Be sold, but
Yeah, so you would just go and do straight bank financing for that. You'd have the collateral of the property, so it's something that could easily be financed. So you're still going to get a competitive rate because interest rates are very good right now. It would be a hair higher than if you went through and did a general obligation bond, but it would still be favorable rates.
thank you. I want to reiterate what's been said several times today. That you've done a great job. Thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. Great job.